of the People's Channel. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Happy Monday, everybody. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, with you all the way through until 6 o'clock. Let's pick the bones out of the rotting carcass that is British politics, shall we? Coming up, there's talk of tears in Downing Street. Could it be over for Truss? Has Jeremy Hunt's budget finished her off? Are we witnessing a very British coup? Jeremy Hunt basically reversed everything Kwasi Kwarteng stood for, which means the Conservative Party is now essentially in the same position it was several weeks ago, but much less popular. We'll cross live to the Commons, where the Chancellor will shortly address MPs. You're not going to want to miss that. There is also an urgent question, which Penny Mordaunt will apparently be answering, on why the Tories changed Chancellor. I wonder whether or not she'll be honest and say that the globalist establishment couldn't allow real change to happen. The establishment media then spread fear and undermined the government again, and here we are. But with turmoil within the party, is the Prime Minister on the verge of being ousted from number 10? Will she just go willingly? Also this hour, a damning report that claims hundreds of Met police officers have been getting away with breaking the law and misconduct, including claims of sexual misconduct, misogyny and racism. Can we still trust our police? Are the police above the law? But before that, see your latest headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. Coming up to 3 minutes past 3, I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The newly appointed Chancellor has announced a reversal of almost all of the tax measures that were made in the mini-budget. The Prime Minister says the government has taken action to chart a new course for growth and says the government's addressing what she called serious challenges in worsening economic conditions. Mr Hunt says £32 billion a year could be saved by not cutting corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax.
I remain extremely confident about the UK's long-term economic prospects as we deliver our mission to go for growth. But growth requires confidence and stability, and the United Kingdom will always pay its way. This government will therefore take whatever tough decisions are necessary to do so.
The Chancellor also announced a review into how energy bills will be supported beyond April next year. He confirmed that government support capping energy bills would stay in place for the next 6 months, but after there would be a new approach targeting those most in need. He also said the energy bill relief scheme for businesses, which will cap corporate energy bills, also will end in April.
Announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. The objective is to design a new approach that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned, whilst ensuring enough support for those in need.
Labour's been granted an urgent question in the House of Commons following the Chancellor's announcement. He's going to address the Commons in half an hour's time. And then answering that question will be Penny Mordaunt on behalf of the Prime Minister. The London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, says the Chancellor's reversal on the mini-budget shows the government have run out of ideas.
The government's in shambles. It's clearly chaos. Families, businesses, investors don't know from one minute to the next what the government's policies is. It's no way to run an economy. It's no way to run the country.
Well, Jeremy Hunt will address the Commons in half an hour's time. You can watch that live here on GB News. In other news now, and Scotland's First Minister says the country would introduce a new currency as soon as practical if the country breaks away from the UK. Well, Nicola Sturgeon set out her economic plans for an independent country. She's claiming the UK's economic model is failing and is holding Scotland back. Ms Sturgeon added the current UK economic turmoil was not a passing storm and instead pointed to a fundamentally flawed system. The Supreme Court's currently deciding whether Scotland can hold a referendum next October without the agreement of Westminster.
It's worth noting that we are so much more advanced than in 2014. Back then, Scotland didn't have its own tax or social security agencies. We do now. Indeed, there have surely been few, if any, nations in history better prepared for independence than we are.
The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, says hundreds of police officers should be sacked following a new report commissioned after the death of Sarah Everard. It was a review of the Met's internal misconduct system. It found that officers are getting away with criminal behaviour owing to an anything-goes attitude. The report described some police procedures as racist and misogynistic. Well, Sir Mark Rowley said he was appalled by the findings and apologised to officers and members of the public who'd been let down. In Ukraine, Kyiv's been hit with several explosions caused by so-called kamikaze drones. Ukraine's presidential office says 3 people have been killed in the attacks. The Ukrainian Air Force say they've shot down 37 drones in the last 24 hours, which they believe have been supplied to Russia by Iran. Several residential buildings have been damaged and there's been fires in a central district. 19 people have been rescued from the rubble. Search and rescue work is ongoing. Essex police have now safely brought down anti-oil protesters who scaled the heights of the QE2 bridge today. Just Stop Oil demonstrators blocked traffic for several hours this morning on a major road in London too. Well, it's all part of a number of climate demonstrations that have been taking place around the country over the last few weeks. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Patrick.
Wow, what a way to start the week with yet more political drama. All Liz Truss's tax-cutting policy ideas, which played a key role in her leadership campaign, are now gone in the space of a morning. We are no longer going for growth, apparently we're going for status quo. Oh, something to get behind, isn't it? Corporation tax, cancelling the rise from 19% to 25%, that's now scrapped. Income tax, removal of 45% rate for high earners, gone. Also, cutting the basic rate of income tax by 1p to 19p, that's been ripped up. And on VAT, tax-free shopping for non-UK visitors, scrapped as well. There's a theme here, isn't there? It's not gone down well with some Conservative MPs. Ben Bradley, for example, the MP for Mansfield, and chap who always tries to look a lot younger than he is, tweeted, well, that effectively renders all the political fallout, criticism, dive in the polls, etc. of the last few weeks entirely pointless, doesn't it? Right back to where we started, just far less popular than before. Liz Truss has also lost the confidence of Conservative MP Crispin Blunt, who called for a resignation live on GB News earlier. Here's why he believes that she's got to go.
Current situation is not sustainable. When your poll ratings with the public are in single figures, and we have a very difficult, challenging situation to present to the electorate and to carry the electorate through with us through some difficult economic decisions, you can't really start from a basis where your own economic policy has been exploded and you don't have the confidence, the combination of the country, of your parliamentary colleagues or the media to be then able to explain the difficult decisions that have got to be made.
It's an absolute shambles, isn't it? Boris Johnson's closest ally, Nadine Dorries, tweeted her strong despair. She said there is no unity candidate. Presumably that's because the Tory party doesn't want to be united at the minute. No one has enough support. Only one MP has a mandate from party members and from the British public, a mandate with an 80-seat majority, and that is Boris Johnson. The choices are simple. Back Liz, if not, bring back Boris, or face a general election within weeks. And Nadine Dorries there, I suspect, really is Right, because we can't get around the fact that people decided it would be a good idea to get rid of one of the most popular Prime Ministers in British history, for a while anyway, who had a massive mandate to lead the nation, right slap bang in the middle of a national and international crisis, and replace him with someone who most Tory MPs didn't want. And then the establishment media and globalist elites said, we can't do anything radical to change the situation, and then a Remainer comes in as Chancellor and reverses everything. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely mad. The whole thing is self-inflicted, and it's almost as if this could have been predicted, isn't it? I mean, I hate to say, you know, yet again, I was right, but I did tweet something quite similar to this earlier on. Many Red Wall Tories only got elected because of Boris Johnson. Several of them have sent in their letters of no confidence. They should be careful what they wish for. And that is true. They should be careful what they wish for, because now they've got this. And all of a sudden, they're eating themselves alive. I hate to say it, but yet again, I was right. Anyway, I wanted to go out and see what the British public made of this current situation. Lots to get stuck into. We are going to go live shortly anyway to Jeremy Hunt, who's going to be addressing the House of Commons. That will be riveting. There's also going to be an urgent question. Penny Mordaunt is going to take that. Loads to get stuck into. Reports of Liz Truss crying in a wardrobe. Here's what the public made of it.
It's kind of pointless. I just don't feel like there's any answers anymore, and we're not getting in the right direction that we need.
So you don't think there's anyone really from any party that gets you going?
No, not really. And for me, I don't believe that groups are like Conservative, Labour, as they were years ago, or what people believe those parties are. So personally, as a young voter, I don't really know what to vote for anymore.
I just don't trust them. They say one thing and something else happens.
Is that the same for either party? Have you lost faith in politics, basically?
A little bit, yes.
It's a tragedy for UK, but not just for UK, for everybody.
Why?
You have a Prime Minister who doesn't really know what she's doing.
I feel like there's been so many people in charge that it's like, you know?
It doesn't really matter who's in charge anymore.
No, definitely not.
I think they're all the same.
They're all kind of the same. It just depends who's at the front.
Has any of the chaos that's happened in the last few weeks actually affected your life?
Well, the cost of living crisis. Yeah, definitely. It was always really hard, especially watching it all on the news. It's kind of hard to watch it change from what it used to be when I was younger to now being like, no one likes you.
Well, I have been riveted this morning until. I mean, it is pathetic. We're like a third world country. She should go.
She should go?
Definitely, no. I didn't ever think she should be there anyway.
Well, a range of views from the British public there. Now, at a briefing with parliamentary colleagues in the Commons this afternoon, the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, it's only a matter of time before I get that wrong, told Tory MPs that Liz Truss backed him to the hilt in tearing up her mini-budget measures and that there are more difficult decisions to come. It's a little bit like a coup, isn't it, without the guns. In his emergency statement this morning, he effectively shredded Liz Truss's flagship mini-budget. But Downing Street has since insisted the Prime Minister remains in charge. Yeah, OK. Let's have a listen to what Hunt had to say earlier when he gave a summary of all of these changes.
The most important objective for our country right now is stability. Governments cannot eliminate volatility in markets, but they can play their part, and we will do so, because instability affects the prices of things in shops, the cost of mortgages, and the values of pensions. And I remain extremely confident about the UK's long-term economic prospects as we deliver our mission to go for growth.
The newly appointed Chancellor will shortly be addressing MPs in the House of Commons. We will be bringing you that live, so make sure you stay locked in here. We've also got an urgent question as well earlier on, which could be quite riveting stuff. But let's cross over to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster, and a phenomenal amount of stuff for us to get stuck into. Can we deal with first things first, Darren? Yes, I know that the Chancellor's giving a statement, but there's an urgent question beforehand. Penny Mordaunt's handling that. What's going on?
Yeah, so every day, essentially, the opposition party, or indeed any MP, can call on the government to come and answer an urgent question in Parliament. It is at the discretion of the Speaker whether that is allowed to happen or not. And Lindsay Hoyle today did say that Labour had, or should have, the opportunity to question the Prime Minister on the sacking of Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, of course, last Friday. God, that seems like a long time ago, and it was only a couple of days ago. Now, the Prime Minister herself is not turning up. Instead, she's sending Penny Mordaunt, who's leader of the House of Commons. Two really interesting things. First of all, the very fact that Liz Truss is not turning up. You know what? Many would feel if she's got the fight in her, she should be there at the dispatch box defending what's happened. We haven't really heard from her since that diabolical press conference last Friday. This is a chance. This is a parliamentary democracy. It should be a chance for MPs to probe the Prime Minister. And second of all, interesting that Penny Mordaunt is essentially going out to bat for the Prime Minister. Now, she did write an article in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday calling for unity, calling for the party to get behind Liz Truss, but many people are also speculating that she herself is on manoeuvres, that she still wants the top job. Of course, she finished third in the leadership election in the summer, so it will be really fascinating to see the choice of words that Penny Mordaunt uses to defend the government and indeed the Prime Minister, as you say, in around 15 minutes' time. And then immediately after that, Jeremy Hunt is going to get on his feet and give a lot more detail about those economic U-turns he was spelling out this morning.
Yes, I mean, it does appear as though Liz Truss may have given up, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how that pans out. You alluded to there what's been going on with the Chancellor. He made a statement this morning. We're going to be taking a statement from Jeremy Hunt live here on GB News Live, probably about half an hour-ish time, maybe an hour's time. What can we expect from it?
Well, I think in many ways it's going to essentially extrapolate what we heard today, and this is going to be really, really interesting in the sense that what you've had is Liz Truss stand on a policy platform this summer of rolling back taxation, and yet within weeks of announcing those tax cuts, they're all going to go into reverse. Frankly, people, Conservative members, voted for Liz Truss this summer, and they've ended up in some ways with Rishi Sunak, or at least his policies in government, because that's precisely almost what Jeremy Hunt is imposing. And I think the really interesting thing, forget about the corporation tax, it's a really big deal. It's a big deal particularly for some businesses. But I mean in terms of the politics, forget about the income tax at the lower end being dropped. Again, big deal, particularly for those on lower incomes, but forget about let's talk about the politics. The politics, I think, most interestingly, of what Jeremy Hunt has talked about today is ending the price cap freeze on energy after 6 months. Now, you know what, even throughout all of this, even since the pound slid and the mini budget was criticised and Kwasi Kwarteng resigned, the one thing ministers have held on to, Patrick, is the fact that the big difference between them and Labour is that they would commit themselves to freezing energy prices with a cap on that for 2 years. That's also being chucked out today. So frankly, what has Liz Truss got in the cupboard? What can she say she's doing different than Boris Johnson was doing 6 months ago, or indeed that Rishi Sunak would have done in government? And that's a big problem. A big problem is that lots of people do not like her as a leader, and they also don't think she's now got any policies. And so the big question for them is, what's the point of Liz Truss? And that is why her job, her career, her time at number 10 seems to be fast running out.
Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey there from a very busy Westminster. Lots taking place. We'll be going live again. Just want to inform you, we will be going live to the Commons in about 15 minutes or so, because we've got an urgent question as to why they got rid of a Chancellor in the middle of a particular crisis, which I think is quite funny because Labour was calling for them to get rid of the Chancellor anyway, but there we are. And then we're also going to be hearing from the new Chancellor, if he is still Chancellor, a little bit after that. But with me now is senior GB News contributor Tim Montgomery and the Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak. It's Steve McCabe. I will start with our very own Tim Montgomery. Tim, it's a dumpster fire in 10 Downing Street, isn't it?
It's unbelievable, and I don't know what our viewers are making of it, Patrick, but I'm completely exhausted by the twists and turns of this drama. I think we have a grown-up in charge now in Jeremy Hunt, and he is in charge, let's face it. He's effectively the Prime Minister now. Liz Truss appointed him on Friday, and she made a couple of U-turns on Friday. He's made many more U-turns since then, and we have seen a positive market reaction. But your question earlier on were absolutely right. What is the point, therefore, of Liz Truss as Prime Minister when effectively Jeremy Hunt is now taking all of the decisions? And I don't think it will be long until Liz Truss is the ex-Prime Minister.
OK, Steve, I'll bring you in now. Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, Steve McCabe. I would argue this is bad news for Labour, because if there is a general election, you might win and you'll have to deal with this mess.
Well, I have to say I do agree with almost everything Tim's just said about the current situation. But yes, it's inevitable that if there is an election, Labour will actually pick up a terrible economic mess. But I think the fundamental difference is we have been clear from the outset that any borrowing we intended to do was for investment to deliberately grow the economy. It wasn't borrowing to throw away in tax cuts.
OK, all right, Tim, I'll bring you back in. Isn't it a bit of a shame, really? We had a big opportunity here to go for growth and try something a little bit radical and a little bit different. And instead, the usual kind of globalist types just got on the back of it all and said, no, you can't do that. We need more of the status quo.
It is a shame. But look, I believe in tax cuts. I don't think there was a measure in that mini budget that in theory and in principle I wouldn't have supported. But look, there's a reason why Conservative governments, Conservative ministers, or any ministers for that matter, don't rush into tax-cutting measures. It's not easy. It's more of an art than a science. You have to prepare the way. You have to make sure you've got the bond markets. You have to make sure you've got investors on side. You have to do things carefully. Even when Nigel Lawson and Margaret Thatcher undertook similar measures in the 1980s, they didn't do them all at once. They did them in prepared ways. And they were people of standing. The markets had seen them take tough decisions. They had this sort of reputation that gave them the permission to do these things. I'm afraid Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss sort of came in as if in a puff of, magic dust and thought that they could change the rules of economics. And we've learnt they couldn't.
Steve McKay, bring you back in again. Labour MP for Birmingham, Selly. Can you understand why the British public are now so disillusioned with politics? Yes, OK, they're a bit upset about what's been going on the Tory benches. There doesn't really look like there's much leadership happening there, but the other alternative is Keir Starmer, and good grief, that's uninspiring, isn't it?
Well, I'm amazed you say that at the moment, because I would have thought the present set of circumstances played right into Keir's hands. What we need is a nice, straightforward, serious man who's going to get on with the job, who isn't going to rely on gimmicks. So I don't think there's any problem there. I think they're utterly disillusioned with 10 years of Tory failure. We've gone right through the cycle, back to austerity, back to the future. And I think they are utterly fed up with that. But if anything, that's the best reason in the world for people wanting a change.
Good stuff. Well, both of you, thank you very much. I enjoyed that. And thank you very much for making the time for a senior contributor at GB News, Tim Montgomery, and Labour MP for Birmingham, Selly Oak, Steve McCabe. Right, what do you make of this so far, people? GB Views at gbnews.uk. We've been discussing the new Chancellor's emergency mini-budget announcements. And the good news is we have our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, in the studio to break down some of those measures for you right now with his video wall. It's on the money.
Well, it seems as if we have two Prime Ministers at the moment, and new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's supporters are talking about him as the Chief Executive and the actual Prime Minister, Liz Truss, as the Chairman. And that sense was only strengthened today after the Chancellor gave his statement from the Treasury before his common statement later this afternoon. And in that Treasury statement, Jeremy Hunt said the government is scrapping, quotes, almost all of the mini-budget tax measures, sweeping away the previous mini-budget, which was very much the joint work of former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the current Prime Minister, Liz Truss. We know from what Jeremy Hunt said this morning that that cut in the basic rate of income tax to 19% due to come in next year rather than in 2024, when Rishi Sunak wanted it, it's scrapped. The basic rate of income tax will now stay at 20p in the pound indefinitely. That will save some money on tax. We also know that Jeremy Hunt has scrapped the 2-year energy price cap. The government announced in the mini-budget that the unit price of electricity and gas would be guaranteed for 2 years for households and 6 months for firms. It will now be 6 months for both households and firms until April 2023, though from April 2023, the Chancellor was keen to stress more vulnerable households would be given some assistance, the extent of which we currently don't know. On top of that, Kwasi Kwarteng's plans to freeze corporation tax at 19%, that is now scrapped, as former Chancellor, or former Chancellor Rishi Sunak wanted back in March. He announced corporation tax will rise to 25p on the profits of companies from next April. That'll be a big blow for a lot of the UK's small and medium-sized enterprises, 6% off their bottom line, and they are a big source of growth. Pretty much the only part of the mini-budget that's been retained, apart from the energy price cap for the next 6 months, is that cut of 1.25% in the national insurance contributions of both households and firms. That accounts for about £19 billion of Kwasi Kwarteng's original £45 billion tax-cutting package. So still a significant amount, though I get the feeling the only reason that's been retained is because that legislation has already gone through Parliament. When he spoke this morning in that emergency statement, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said his tax rises, they add up to an extra tax revenue of about £32 billion a year. What's that in real money? Well, that's about 5% of all the tax collected every year. So a pretty chunky increase. And Jeremy Hunt was keen to say, finally, in his statement, I remain extremely confident about the UK's economic prospects as we go for growth. We may or we may not get growth in the next 6 to 12 months. Also, we may or may not have Liz Truss as Prime Minister.
Wow, Liam Halligan, thank you very, very much. A good summary of the absolute carnage that has been unfolding now for a little period of time. Interesting as well, Liam Halligan is the only person who's allowed anywhere near that video wall, by the way. I think it's written into all of our contracts. We're not allowed to touch it, but there we are. Labour has been granted a Commons urgent question on the economic situation after Liz Truss refused to come to the House after the sacking on Friday of Kwasi Kwarteng. I believe we can actually cross live now to the House of Commons where this urgent question is taking place, I think. Not just yet, apparently. There we go. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Make sure that you get in touch with some of them. I believe now, though, that we are going to go to somebody else. Liz Truss is battling to save her premiership after the bulk of her economic strategy has been ditched. And senior Tory backbencher Sir Chris Walker, Charles Walker even, has said that Truss's position is enormously precarious and cabinet ministers have been invited to Number 10 for an informal reception this evening as the Prime Minister battles to save her premiership. However, Number 10 insists that Truss is providing stability of leadership. Joining me now is former advisor to David Cameron, Philip Blond. Philip, thank you very much. Look, what would you actually be telling Truss to do at this stage? There are unconfirmed reports of tears in Downing Street.
I'm afraid to say I think she should resign. I think that it's over. She's lost the entire support of the parliamentary party. I don't think she should expose herself even to PMQs, really. Her agenda's gone, her support has gone. The libertarian offer, if you will, is polling the lowest, lower even than Jeremy Corbyn. I think for the Conservative Party, it's a rescue job now. And, and we
Philip,
need somebody else.
I'm concerned, though, about what this really means for Britain, because we had a Prime Minister who clearly believed in a particular way, in a particular economic model. Clearly, she did. And so did the Chancellor. And then, basically, she tried to implement it, and I suppose you could argue maybe the establishment or the elites or whatever, the globalists just got involved and said, no, we're not really going to let you do that. And so she had to row back from it, and now she's put, kind of typical Remainer-in-Chief Hunt as the status quo candidate as our new Chancellor. I mean, what does this mean going forward? Because if anyone tries to do anything radical ever now in politics, do they just get slammed down? Someone trying to sort out what's going on in the Channel? Do we just have to accept that we've got status quo politics in this country forever?
No, I think it's much more specific than that. It's that you don't have... If you're a government that needs to sell debt to fund its everyday activities, which is what this government needs to do, because we've had long COVID, we've had the energy crisis, and we also have a war in Ukraine. What you don't do is don't cut taxes in the face of rising inflation and rising interest rates. And you don't cut taxes without doing an OBR report. You don't cut taxes that are unfunded. And it's like mythical belief in kind of the Laffer curve that just magically cutting taxes will lead to growth. And I think it's kind of ideological capture of their minds. And I think reality is what's corrected them. It's not a Remainer conspiracy. It's not the establishment. It's reality. You know, try going to the bank and being heavily extended and saying, I want to borrow more money, but I've got no conceivable or strategic, medium, short, long-term.
Yeah, but I get that. Look, I absolutely get that, right? I get that completely. But at the same time, the IMF did predict that we would grow our economy faster and to a greater extent than any of the G7 country. You could argue maybe that in a time of this global crisis that we're in now, there was at least the possibility if anyone was going to emerge on it and go for growth, then maybe we could have done that. I'm just wondering, though, have we witnessed a bit of a soft coup here, right? OK, it doesn't have the kind of usual African-style dictator and the guns behind them. But at the same time, Jeremy Hunt has basically announced a load of economic policies that are the opposite of what his Prime Minister wanted to put in initially and essentially has rendered her position untenable, surely.
I think her position is untenable. I mean, I rather like her personally, but philosophically and economically, I've always been opposed to extreme libertarianism. I've always thought it would be a disaster, and so it's proved. I don't think...
Why?
I don't think it's undemocratic to try and save the country's economy. I don't think it's undemocratic to prevent interest rates doubling and doubling again. I don't think it's undemocratic to take control of the ship so it doesn't hit the rocks. And I think that's honestly where we were, which is a terrible embarrassment as a G7 country to even be in that position. And it's bizarre to me in the extreme that they couldn't theorise that would happen. Did they not know that it's unsustainable to go into a debt market saying we're borrowing more, but we don't really have, in the hope of some future growth, that we can't really...
I think for me personally, it was the lack of comms around it. I mean, a lot of people seem to be saying that this would have been quite a good idea, perhaps at the wrong time. And if it is at the wrong time, but you've got genuine conviction in it, then you need to sell it to people. And I remember sitting at the Labour Party conference doing my show there thinking, good grief, the Tories have announced this stuff. OK, it was a quotes-unquote proper Conservative budget or whatever. There was a bit of a little bit of media positivity. And then they just went missing for a week and left the ground completely open for Labour to slam it and open up this big, love the rich and hate the poor stuff. And then gradually, here we are. There was no real attempt to sell this to the public or bring the public with them or bring a lot of the media with them. And I found that quite tricky. But look, I'm sorry about this. I've got to throw live to House of Commons. Apologies, Philip, but thank you very much for coming on the show. I'll talk to you again soon, Philip Blonder. Labour has been granted a Commons urgent question on the economic situation after Liz Truss refused to come to the House, and I believe we can go to that now.
With apologies to the Leader of the Opposition and the House, the PM is detained on urgent business.
I must hear the answer of why the Prime Minister is not here.
I'm afraid you will have to make do with me, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has taken the decision to appoint my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, one of the longest serving and most experienced parliamentarians, as her Chancellor. Overriding priority is to restore financial stability in the face of volatile global conditions. We will take whatever tough decisions are necessary and have made changes to the growth plan, which the Chancellor is waiting to update the House on as soon as this urgent question finishes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Right Honourable Member for Portsmouth North for answering the question put to the Prime Minister. I guess under this Tory government, everybody gets to be Prime Minister for 15 minutes. The country, Mr. Speaker, the country is in an economic crisis made in Downing Street. Because they've lost all credibility, government borrowing costs have soared, mortgage rates have ballooned, markets need reassuring. And there is long-term damage that can't be undone. Once you've crashed a car at 100 miles an hour, you've damaged it for good, and you're going to be paying much more on your insurance for years to come. And and it's working people who will pay. Left wondering if they can afford to stay in their homes if their hopes of owning a home haven't already been crushed. So now it's time for leaders to lead. But where is the Prime Minister? Hiding away, dodging questions, scared of her own shadow. The lady's not for turning up. Now it's time to be honest about the mistakes they made. But what does the Prime Minister say? My vision is right. My mission remains. I sacked my Chancellor, but I can't tell you why. And now's a time for consistent messaging. But what do we get? A Prime Minister saying absolutely no spending reductions. A Chancellor saying there will be cuts. A Prime Minister saying she's in charge. A Chancellor who thinks he's the CEO and she's just the chair. How can Britain get the stability it needs when all the government offers is grotesque chaos? How can Britain get the stability it needs when instead of leadership we have this utter vacuum? How can Britain get the stability it needs when the Prime Minister has no mandate from her party and no mandate from the country?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by saying I'm quite quietly confident that the Leader of the Opposition will not have his 15 minutes of fame. With regard to questions raised on economic policy, I will defer to the Chancellor. Honourable members will want time to question him fully and hear the detail. I do not wish to eat into that time. Our constituents will want to hear about the issues facing them, their bills, mortgages, benefits and their businesses. So I had wondered just what else the Leader of the Opposition wished to discuss in this UQ that would delay such an important statement. In his urgent question, he paints a contrast, so let me paint one too. The decision taken by our Prime Minister would have been a very tough one, politically and personally. Yet, she has taken it, and she has done so. She has done so because it is manifestly in the national interest that she did. She did not hesitate to do so because her focus is on the well-being of every one of our citizens. It was the right thing to do, and whether you agree with it or not, it took courage to do it. In contrast, what the Right Honourable Gentleman has done today, at this most serious moment, took no courage or judgment or regard to the national interest. 3 years ago, Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, when this Parliament was paralysed by Brexit, a general election would have been in the national interest, and he blocked it. Today, when the country needs some stability and urgent legislation to put through cost of living measures, and while we are in the middle of an economic war levelled at every school and hospital in this country, he now calls for one, and weeks of disruption and delay. We will take no lectures from the Honourable Gentleman on working in the national interest. I could point to his frustration of us leaving the EU and campaigning for a second referendum. I could point to his support for the Right Honourable Member for Islington North and his positions on NATO, or his arguments against us leaving lockdown or our involvement with the EU Vaccines Agency, all against the national interest. And nor will we take any lectures on consistency of policy or messaging. The Right Honourable Gentleman has abandoned every single one of his pledges during the Labour leadership contest.
Look, folks, I think the country also wants to hear what's being said. If I can't hear, they can't hear. So can we please listen to the Leader of the House? I'm sure it's coming to the end now. Leader of the House.
I am, Mr. Speaker. Which is why, even on our...
Order. Mr. Perkins, if you want to go and get a cup of tea, I'm more than happy to pay for it.
Which is why, Mr. Speaker, even on our toughest and most disappointing days, I will always be proud to sit on this side of the House. We will put the national interest first. Now let's get on and hear from the Chancellor.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to hear from the Leader of the House, more importantly, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Not so more important. Can I say to my honourable friend that the Leader of the Opposition has reversed most of the things he said he'd do if he became leader. Yeah. If you have a short memory, it's only 9 months ago when some of his senior colleagues were circling saying whether they could be a better Leader of the Opposition than him. Yeah. And can I put it to the Leader of the House that when circumstances change, it's right for policy to change, and if what's announced today leads to a lower rate of inflation, a lower cost of borrowing, and a greater chance this country can get back to prosperity, it's worth doing.
Well, I agree with the Father of the House in what he says. The Right Honourable Gentleman opposite has reversed his position on economic justice, social justice, climate change, promoting peace and human rights, common ownership, defending migrants' rights, strengthening the rights of workers and trade unions, radical devolution of power, wealth and opportunity, equality, and effective opposition to the Tories.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Kirsty Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, Scotland's First Minister set out an optimistic, ambitious and credible economic plan for Scotland's future. A leader who spent over an hour setting out and answering questions on the positive case for our country's independence. It's a very stark contrast to a Prime Minister hiding in Downing Street. A Prime Minister terrified to answer for the mess she has made. The mess which will cause so much harm to all of our constituents. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to keep this short and to the point. Can the Leader of the House tell us exactly where on earth is the Prime Minister? And if she doesn't even have the backbone to show up here today, is there really any point in her showing up here again? Surely time's up. She needs to go and let the people decide.
Well, I'm glad to hear the First Minister of Scotland made a statement. I'm hoping that shortly the House will be able to hear from the Chancellor of the Exchequer to set out the government's position. I'd be interested to know if the First Minister's statement included the tax dividend to every Scottish household of being a member of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, in the last 4 weeks, the facts are that the global economic conditions that we face have worsened. Now, the opposition may not want to acknowledge that, but that is the truth. Inflation rates have increased around the world, and in the United States are now the highest they've been since 1982. Does my right honourable friend agree that we should always be prepared to make the policy changes we need in the best interests of the people that we represent?
I do agree with my right honourable friend, and that is why the Prime Minister has taken this decision.
Dame Angela Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What we have seen in the last month is one of the largest humiliations that this country has ever experienced. And it's directly as a result of the current Prime Minister's agenda, which she set out to the tiny sliver of UK people that voted for her to be the Prime Minister. Now, the Right Honourable Lady is perhaps auditioning to be the next one along, because surely she knows that this humiliated Prime Minister simply cannot last.
Look, this, as I said in my opening remarks, this will have been a very difficult decision for the Prime Minister, and she has taken it because it is in the national interest, and she should have all of our support in doing so.
Peter Byrne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I was the financial director of a PLC and I went to a board and suggested that we cut our revenues greatly, and we wouldn't put up a tax, an increase next year, the director of the board would look at me and say, well, that's good. So, Peter, what are the spending implications and how is it going to be funded? And unfortunately for the previous Chancellor, he didn't provide those answers. We had a statement lasting 2.5 hours instead of a budget which should have been debated for 23 or 24 hours. So would the Leader of the House admit that that's the reason the Chancellor had to do? He produced a part budget, not the whole thing.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his remarks, and I hope that we will soon be able to hear from the Chancellor on these important matters, concerns for members of this House and also their constituents.
Ed Davey. Speaker, the previous Prime Minister shattered the public's trust in the government. The current Prime Minister has trashed the British economy. Meanwhile, Conservative MPs have sat there and let it happen. So for the damage and pain they have caused across our country, will the Leader of the House, on behalf of the whole party, address the people and businesses of our great country and apologise?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. We have made this change for a reason, and I understand that people want certainty and reassurance about their bills, their businesses and their benefits. And I am sorry that the events leading to the changes today have added to the concerns about the major volatility that was already there existing in the economy. That's why we are putting it right today, and what my right honourable friend the Chancellor will be speaking about in his announcement shortly.
Richard Grant.
Speaker, the country is waiting to hear from the Chancellor on issues of fiscal responsibility, market stability and sustainable growth. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that what this entirely unnecessary debate shows is that the opposition are putting politics before the interests of our constituents?
I agree with my honourable friend completely.
Hilary Benn.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House said yesterday that what the country needs is stability and not a soap opera. I agree with her. So can she explain to the House why the Prime Minister is still in office when it's clear to almost everyone, including many of her colleagues behind her today, that she is no longer in power?
I think it is incredibly important today that the Chancellor be allowed to set out the policy changes that is made, to provide answers to this House and the country, and we can restore some certainty to the growth programme. That is what will help stability, and I would ask all honourable members to consider in their questioning to me how those questions will help that scenario.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pragmatism, dealing with the world as it is, those are traditional strengths of Conservatives in government. And the fiscal changes being announced by the new Chancellor today are entirely correct. Does my right honourable friend agree with me, though, that the very last thing that's needed right now, the last thing that mortgage holders need, people struggling to get on the housing ladder, people worried about paying their fuel bills, the very last thing they need right now is further political instability, upsetting markets?
My right honourable friend is right, and we also need to put through legislation to enact some of the measures that will help with the cost of living issues people are facing. We need time on the floor of this House to do that, and we also need to give the public some certainty about the future.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The turbulence in the markets, though, and the reason that the Chancellor was replaced is not just about tax. It's about trust. And trust in the British government comes from the knowledge that it enjoys the consent of the British people. How does she think that's going?
Leader of the House.
I think that the Chancellor should be able to come to the floor of the House and outline his policies. This is a serious moment. We want to ensure that the markets are reassured, and I would suggest that any questions she has on economic policy are directed to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In giving the answer that she did to the Leader of the Opposition, my right honourable friend has abundantly demonstrated to this House what an enormous asset she is to the government party. And can I just ask the right honourable lady, does she agree with me that any single Conservative MP would make a fantastic Chancellor, well above any socialist or separatist opposite?
I think in terms of the opposition's performance, I think Larry the Cat would give them a run for their money.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, I and my colleagues take no joy in the difficulties which the government and the country finds itself in at present, because of course it affects all of our constituents. And would the Leader of the House not agree with me that for most people watching this today, they don't want to see political point scoring or in-house backstabbing. They want to know how they're going to be able to afford to pay their mortgages, how they're going to meet their cost of living, and how they're going to make decisions about their businesses.
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and lovely though I am, I think people want to hear from the Chancellor. They want to hear the detail of the policies that are changing. They want to be able to, members will want to be able to ask him about how that is going to affect their constituents. That is what we should be focusing on today.
John Lemon.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the speed at which the new Chancellor has acted, but can the Leader of the House confirm that the Chancellor and all members of the Government will continue to work with colleagues in the backbenches to ensure that we are able to communicate the great successes of this Conservative Government to all parts of the nation?
I know the Chancellor wants to work with all members of this House in the interests of all of our constituents, and I hope that there will be also opportunities to talk about our record in government and how we've transformed this country for the better since 2010.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House's response to this urgent question was quite frankly ridiculous, claiming that the Prime Minister cowering in some corner somewhere is courageous. It does not take courage to crash our economy. No. It takes reckless arrogance and a disregard for ordinary people's working lives. It equally does not take courage to sack her Chancellor after barely a month. It takes total desperate opportunism. So will she admit that what it will take to restore our fiscal credibility and the confidence of the markets is a Labour government?
The Prime Minister's actions did take courage, personal courage, and it was the right thing to do in the national interest. I think the right thing to do in the national interest is let the Chancellor give his statement.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it was during the pandemic and £450 billion spent, whether it is Ukraine and 100,000 refugees who are now in our country that our constituents are looking after, or whether it is the hardships of the energy crisis, can my right honourable friend tell us that this government will always do what is necessary to step up to the plate and help the most vulnerable people in society across in our country and the rest of the world?
As I'm sure the Chancellor will say, we are in very volatile times. The war in Ukraine is not just a war against the people of Ukraine. It is an economic war against other nations too. And we will always do the right thing in those circumstances.
Then Sybil Roberts.
The new Chancellor's veneer of fiscal responsibility fails to disguise that imposing more painful austerity is a political choice made to save the absentee Prime Minister
from the consequences of her ideological experiment. With Welsh Government already facing a shortfall of over £4 billion over 3 years, and public services close to buckling, further austerity will entrench the vast wealth inequalities that characterise this disunited kingdom. Will she admit that now even the pretence of levelling up is dead?
Well, I would ask the Honourable Lady to remember that we have given the largest budget ever to the devolved administrations. But against the backdrop of coming into government where there was no money left, we still have managed to hold down fuel duty, introduce a living wage, create a modern welfare system where people are better off, and got nearly 4 million people into work.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the government's desire to reduce the tax on working people, but of course we must ensure stability in the markets because these go hand in hand, and therefore I welcome the Chancellor's announcement to the markets earlier this morning. So can my right honourable friend confirm that the government is working with the OBR and others in developing policy for the upcoming medium-term fiscal plan?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his remarks. He is absolutely right to stress the importance of stability, and I think that will be helped by the Chancellor being able to make his statement.
To Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House suggests that we should be grateful that the Prime Minister has made a difficult decision, and I presume she means grateful that she's stuck to it, given the number of U-turns that we've seen over the last couple of days. But that's the job, making difficult decisions. There are difficult decisions to be made about what is happening in Ukraine, about the fact that President Putin has nuclear weapons, about the chaos caused by Brexit, gang crime, the climate crisis, Ebola in Africa. And all we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away. Isn't it about time she did and let somebody else who can make decisions in the British national interest get in charge instead?
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady. She is not here for a very good reason. But neither has she taken this decision to win the Honourable Lady's gratitude. She's done it out of a sense of duty because she knows what's in the national interest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend said, it will have been a difficult decision for the Prime Minister, both politically and also personally, because of her loyalty to my right honourable friend from Spelthorne. But it's vital that we provide economic stability for families and businesses in constituencies like mine and across the country. And we've already seen that this morning from the Chancellor. So does she agree with me that it's high time that this House heard from the Chancellor about how we are going to provide that stability?
Yes.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. We know that the Prime Minister is now not in power. We know that there has been a coup because the Prime Minister should be here to defend her decisions today. We want to know from the Prime Minister why her economic plan has been trashed just weeks after it was announced. We want to know from her whether she is sorry for the misery she has caused to millions of people across this country. We want to know on behalf of those who now have new mortgages at higher interest rates for the foreseeable future, whether she's sorry for her actions. The Prime Minister, she says, isn't cowering away. So if she isn't cowering away, will she be here to sit by the Chancellor and to show her confidence in the new plans to the country?
I know it is not usually in the nature of the honourable gentleman to overly dramatise a situation. But I don't think there has been a coup. What I do agree with what he said is these are serious matters for our constituents, and I hope that all honourable members will be able to question the Chancellor and get answers they need for their constituents.
Jerome Mayor.
Mr. Speaker. Fiscal credibility is always the backbone of any growth policy, so I welcome the actions of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But just as important are pro-growth reforms to back entrepreneurs and businesses. So can the Leader of the House confirm to me that the government will continue to review EU-inspired regulations to make them bespoke for the UK economy, deliver pro-growth investment zones right across the country, and boost our energy supply?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. This is really important to our communities. We will continue with our programme of on EU law and EU retained law, also on our enabling regulation the Department for Trade is looking at, and also on investment zones, which there has been an enormous number of expressions of interest.
Bill Esterson.
In her initial answer to the urgent question, the Leader of the House blamed international circumstances. But if that's true, why is it that people in this country face paying more in their increases in mortgage payments than elsewhere in the world? And if it's true, why did the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England say yesterday that the crash in the markets is the result of unique circumstances in the UK? Wouldn't it be better for her and for the Prime Minister to admit that they got it wrong and that they are responsible as a first and necessary step in rebuilding confidence in the markets?
Well, I would point the honourable gentleman to mortgage rates elsewhere in the world, but also suggest he raises this with the Chancellor, who is waiting to give a statement.
Dr. Kieran Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the change of approach, and I think it was the right decision to take in the circumstances. At times like this, our constituents still do want to be reassured. They're worried about their bills. Can you confirm for our constituents in the whole House that our plan to help people with their bills this winter remains in place?
I can give him that assurance. The Chancellor's statement today is incredibly important, and people will want to hear about the package that we're bringing forward to help on energy prices, but also other measures as well to help with cost of living.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've just seen the be replaced by another who in just 40 days has herself failed to meet. I ask the leadership to sack your Chancellor for doing exactly what he was asked to do. Is it objectivity to refuse to allow the OBR experts to assess the so-called mini-budget? And does she agree that the first test of accountability is to actually show up?
Leader of the House.
I would suggest to her that it is leadership to take tough decisions in the national interest, even though they may be personally and politically difficult to take.
Mr. Speaker, the party opposite stood on a manifesto that would have inflicted the highest ever tax burden on my constituents. So does my right honourable friend that Labour can never be trusted to support the hard-working people of the UK or South End West?
The honourable lady is not wrong.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Speaker, Pendleton Leisure Centre, a flagship council development to tackle health inequalities in an area of high deprivation which seldom enjoys such investment, was suspended last week, largely, I'm told, as a result of the government's economic car crash and the prospect of more public spending cuts to come. Will the Leader of the House apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister to the people of Salford?
Leader.
Well, this is... although this is not business questions, if the honourable lady would like to give me the details of that case, I'd be happy to take it up.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend assure the House and my constituents in Clwyd South that this government will always pay its way and make whatever tough decisions are necessary to ensure that we go for growth in a responsible and conservative way?
I can give him that assurance, and the Chancellor will be along shortly to give him some more details.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Leader of the House, who does she consider does a U-turn better, the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Scottish Tories?
Well, I live in hope that the honourable gentleman and his party might do a U-turn and decide to honour the democratic vote in a referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since being elected, I've spent 3 years working on the Health Select Committee with the now Chancellor. He's got an eye for detail and compassion as well. Isn't he exactly the right person to come forward and stabilise and demonstrate to the markets how difficult it can be in turbulent times? But he is the man to bring us forward.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for those remarks about the new Chancellor. I think that is precisely why the Prime Minister has chosen him.
Dave Downer,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the national interest and also to offer further reassurance to the markets, can the Leader of the House just confirm that the Prime Minister will not be taking any decisions on economic policy in the future?
For the honourable lady, and I'm sure the whole House appreciates her question. But the Prime Minister and her Chancellor and her Cabinet will be taking these decisions in the future, and the decision that she has taken over the weekend, although personally difficult for her, is the right one for the nation.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House has mentioned a couple of times now that the Prime Minister has taken difficult decisions. Can I please enlighten her that these are not difficult decisions? Difficult decisions are what are facing our constituents, choosing whether they can actually turn the lights on, finding out how they can heat their homes and how they can feed their children. Don't our constituents and those people deserve an answer from our Prime Minister and not an answer about just saying our Chancellor will come and tell us later?
Well, the honourable lady will want to hear from the Chancellor because she will be able to ask him the precise questions that are of interest to her constituents. This government has always protected people against the cost of living, and it has always protected the most vulnerable in our society, and we will continue to do that.
Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Leader of the House that she and her colleagues do not have a monopoly on the understanding of what it is to take difficult decisions in the national interest. In 2010, my colleagues and I entered government and took many difficult decisions for which we paid a political price. We did that because it was in the national interest. We did it on the advice of the Bank of England, and we set up the Office of Budget Responsibility as a consequence. The Prime Minister would also be part of that government. At what point did she think it was no longer necessary to listen to the Bank of England and the OBR?
Well, can I first thank the right honourable gentleman for raising the issues we faced in 2010 when we came in. People will remember the note outlining there was no money left. What is less well understood is the scorched earth policy that accompanied it to tie an incoming government into all kinds of contractual difficulties to make their job so much harder. That is why those on the opposition benches should never be allowed near government. And I would say to the honourable gentleman that the Chancellor will be along shortly to answer questions about the OBR.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it absolutely incredible that the Leader of the House is incredulous that people might want to hear from the Prime Minister. As if it's like, a political game to ask the leader of our country questions. It is an embarrassing thing to assert. But in the national interest, and she so wants to hear from the Chancellor, can I ask her to be completely honest, because nothing that we've seen has been honest. I apologise.
It's not of an individual, it's withdrawn. Right, carry on.
Oh, yeah, because it wasn't an individual. OK. Good on. Can I ask her, why is it, because we had to have the statement earlier at 11 o'clock while I was on the train, when you can actually get on a train, can I ask her why the markets needed reassuring?
Well, the first thing I would say to the Honourable Lady is I fully appreciate the optics of me appearing at the dispatch box, but there is a very genuine reason why the Prime Minister is not here today, and I would just stress to you that it is not. I can understand people wishing to make political hay over it. She would wish to be here, but she is not able to at this moment. And the Chancellor will be along shortly to answer these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, the value of the pound fell after the Prime Minister walked out after just over 8 minutes from her press conference. Isn't it increasingly the case that she and her government are a risk to Britain's financial stability? And isn't it time she stopped shirking, turned out to be held accountable, or get out of the way and call a general election?
Well, I would just stress again to all honourable colleagues that there is a very good reason why the Prime Minister is not here, and that the Chancellor will be making a statement shortly where you can ask him these questions.
David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the subject of the replacement of the Chancellor, given that he lasted 38 days in office and crashed the economy, can the Leader of the House confirm that the Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne, the former Chancellor, will be rejecting his ministerial severance payment?
I would not be involved in that decision at all, but the Honourable Member will know who he can write to find that out.
Ben Bradshaw.
She has claimed repeatedly that the Prime Minister has been courageous. But if the Prime Minister were really courageous, she would be here today, wouldn't she? If the Prime Minister cannot or won't come and explain to the British people the reasons for her humiliating U-turns and to apologise to them, as she just did from the dispatch box, for the damage the Tories she have done to this country and living standards and businesses, what is the point of her?
Leader of the House.
Well, I would refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave a little while ago about the Prime Minister, and again to the answer I gave a moment ago about the fact that I certainly regret the uncertainty that has added to already worries about the very volatile global economic situation, and that is why I'm keen and happy that we have a statement from the Chancellor today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister repeatedly declared that she was working in lockstep with her Chancellor, but then very unceremoniously dumped her closest political friend at the earliest possible opportunity in order to temporarily save her job. And now, in the greatest of ironies, she has sent out the very Right Honourable Lady to speak on her behalf, who is very desperately seeking to replace her. But Leader of the House, I understand that Downing Street is hosting a reception this evening. Is it a wake?
I would say to the honourable gentleman that the motivations for the Prime Minister taking the decisions that she has have been about the national interest. He may not appreciate, and I'm not asking him to, the courage and the duty that she felt to do that, but that is why she has done it.
Chris Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to be clear, can the Leader of the House confirm now that the former Chancellor has been removed by the Prime Minister for acting on her instructions, and can she also confirm that the Prime Minister overruled the former Chancellor in the contents of the financial statement before it was made? Because if both things are true, the Prime Minister needs to resign, doesn't she?
Prime Minister.
These are not matters for me. He may wish to raise matters with the Chancellor. I think what our constituents want to hear from us today is about the issues that are affecting them, and that is what the Chancellor will be speaking about whenever he gets to this chamber.
Wayne David.
Can I ask the Leader of the House, on behalf of the Prime Minister, will she simply say to the people of this country, we are sorry?
I have done so twice before in this UQ, and I will do so again. I know that this is an incredibly uncertain time for families and businesses across the country. The events that led up to the statement that is being made today are unfortunate, and I am pleased that the Prime Minister has taken decisive action to stabilise markets, and I'm sure that he will want to question the Chancellor on those detailed matters. I have done, and I'm happy to do so again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're told that the Prime Minister is going to be coming in here in a moment to join the Chancellor when he makes his statement, presumably propped up El Cid like Charlton Heston. But this should have been an opportunity for the Prime Minister to show leadership and to apologise to the nation before the dispatch box in the chamber of the House of Commons. Yet she's failed to do so. We've all heard the stories about our constituents up and down the country who have had mortgages withdrawn at the last minute, whose lives have been put on hold because of the reckless mini-budget that she agreed with her Chancellor. So doesn't the Leader of the House agree that it is reckless of the Prime Minister to not show that leadership today and be here in this chamber to be accountable for what she has done?
Leader. I think the Prime Minister has shown leadership in taking the tough decision that she has, and not for the first time. If our Prime Minister, when she was Foreign Secretary, had not shown leadership, we would not, alongside European nations, be giving the support to Ukraine that we rightly should be proud of.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that the Prime Minister was as courageous as the leader herself should be here answering questions this afternoon. The fact that the Prime Minister is unwilling to come to the House shows the complete lack of authority she now has. Week before the country, week before Parliament, and week before the markets. Refusing to face parliamentary accountability for actions is not cowardice, it's a dereliction of duty. Does Leader House not agree with me? It's time for this, it's well past time for this lame duck Prime Minister to go.
Leader. The Prime Minister has come to this House many times, and in the previous role she's held, she's come to this House many times, often to talk about very difficult issues. There is a genuine reason, honourable members, why she is not here, and I hope that she will be able to join the House later this afternoon.
Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't going to rise to ask a question, but I've been concerned at some of the answers that the Leader of the House has given. If we are to stabilise the markets and restore some confidence in the economy, we have to have trust in the strong leadership of our country, and that is the role of the Prime Minister. She has said a number of times that there are good reasons why the Prime Minister is not here this afternoon. In the interests of total transparency and in the interests of proper accountability and to restore confidence in markets, will she give us those reasons?
Leader. The Right Honourable Lady will have to be content with my assurances. I can't disclose the reasons. I have asked if I can. I am being very genuine with the House on this matter. I hope that she'll be able to join us a bit later on this afternoon. But both the Prime Minister and her Chancellor and her Cabinet are determined to take the tough decisions to ensure that we have stability and confidence going forward. And I hope that the Chancellor's statement will reassure the Right Honourable Lady.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be honest, I just thought it was utterly shabby to sack the Chancellor of the Exchequer for doing precisely what he'd been told to do by the boss. It's like when you sack the staff for messing up yourself. It's not on, it's bad form, it's not honourable, it's despicable. But what really worries me is that you can't really govern if you don't have a mandate. You can't govern if you can't get your budget through this House, because by definition that shows that the House does not have confidence in you. Every honourable government previous to this, at that moment when it's evident that they couldn't get their budget through, has resigned and allowed a general election. Isn't that what should happen now?
Well, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that I think it is an honourable thing to act in the national interest, even if it is incredibly difficult personally and politically for someone to do that. And that all members on this side of the House were elected in 2019 as a team on a manifesto that we are determined to deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady has said many times that the Prime Minister couldn't come here for a specific reason at this time. So could I ask the Leader of the House, is there a reason why the Prime Minister decided she didn't want to make a statement to the House? Because she could have chosen any time to do that, even at 10 p.m. Does the Leader of the House not think that we as elected MPs and the public in this country deserve to hear from the Prime Minister?
I'm sure there will be many opportunities to hear from the Prime Minister, some in the next 24 hours, but given the nature of the statement today, it is appropriate that the Chancellor delivers it.
Brendan O'Hara.
Whether she's under her desk or behind a couch, people rightly view the Prime Minister's sacking of the Chancellor as a particularly unedifying act of self-preservation, given that he was thrown under the bus for saying exactly what she asked him to say. It would be like the ventriloquist Ray Allen sacking Lord Charles for saying the wrong thing. So will the Leader of the House join me now in asking the ventriloquist dummies on her own benches who demanded that the Scottish Government follow this insane economy-wrecking policy to apologise to the people of Scotland?
Leader of the House.
Well, the first thing I would say is to thank him for the fact that the public might be concerned for the former Chancellor. But I think what they are really going to be concerned about is their own household budgets and their businesses. And that is why it is important this decision was taken, and we will hear from the Chancellor shortly. With regard to his other point, I would just point out that there are many people, including many people in Scotland, who would like the First Minister to apologise for some of her decisions.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With her economic plan much like a judgment in tatters, the fact she can't even be bothered to come to the chamber today, what is the point of the Prime Minister?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that insightful question. I repeat, the Prime Minister would normally be here, but there is a good reason why she isn't.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it true that the member for Spelthorne first found out that he was sacked on Twitter rather than being told to his face?
Leader of the House.
Honourable and right honourable members of this House are obviously want to ask all kinds of questions, but I think what the public are worried about is the cost of living issues, the stability of the markets, the energy package that we will be putting through later today to help them with the cost of living. And I would just urge all colleagues to remember the context in which we are meeting this afternoon.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister on the way to the Palace?
I would very much like to be able to tell all honourable colleagues what the Prime Minister's business is today, but there are very serious matters as well as economic matters that are in the Prime Minister's in tray, and she, as people will know, she comes to this House on a regular basis and she'll be here tomorrow, but she's not able to be here at this precise moment.
Toby Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, the markets were spooked not just by the reckless mini-budget, but also by the sense that we had a Prime Minister incapable of answering questions at the end of a press conference and without any sort of grip on this government. So it is entirely legitimate for my right honourable friend from Holborn St Pancras to give her an opportunity to come and assure the markets. Isn't the reality that the Prime Minister's inability to answer questions is just as fundamental as the failure on policy in why this country is now in an economic crisis?
I'm buoyed up by the fact that the members on the opposition benches very much want to see the Prime Minister, and I hope that if she is able to join us this afternoon, that they will give her a big cheer when she does.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I accept what the Right Honourable Lady is saying about the Prime Minister not being here, that there may be a very good reason. And I also agree with her when she said frequently that we must be acting at the moment in the national interest. For me, the national interest is what is in the interests of our people, our constituents. And what they are telling me in Edinburgh West, and I'm sure very many of the rest of you, is that they no longer have any confidence in this Prime Minister. That while she may have had the courage to sack her partner in presenting the growth plan to the country, that what they would like is for her now to have the courage to accept that she was also wrong and to step down. So will the Right Honourable Lady and her Cabinet colleagues please take that message back to the Prime Minister wherever she is?
Leader of the House. Well, I think that the Prime Minister, in her current role and previous roles, has always acted in the national interest, and she will continue to do so. Her government will continue to support her. What we need, this country needs some stability and some assurance now, and she always takes decisions in the national interest.
Davis.
Mr. Speaker, as the new Chancellor has reversed all the economic promises made by the Prime Minister in her election campaign to become Prime Minister, and that very Chancellor had the fewest votes in that leadership election, he was thrown out with 18, doesn't this show that the next Prime Minister should not be chosen by the members opposite and their wider membership, but by the British people in a general election as soon as possible to get this country back on track?
Well, I think there are serious questions that we should be examining as a Parliament today, and I hope that we will soon move on to the Chancellor's statement. I think that is what our constituents are concerned and worried about, and not about events within the Westminster bubble.
Matt Weston.
Speaker, obviously this is an absolutely legitimate question that's been put forward today. The public wants to know why the Prime Minister sacked her Chancellor after just 38 days, and particularly given that she was co-architect of the plans, the economic plans, why she herself has not resigned.
Tomorrow, I think we are having, or later in the week, we are having Prime Minister's questions. Members have an opportunity every week to put questions to the Prime Minister.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pound is falling off a cliff, interest rates are soaring, inflation is rocketing, and pensions have been on the verge of collapse. We have a new Chancellor who is the de facto Prime Minister, and a Prime Minister who has been reduced to a spectator as her own MPs plot her removal. The Honourable Lady today, the Leader of the House, has defended the Prime Minister today, but can I ask her, does she think if she had won the leadership contest, she would have been a better Prime Minister?
Leader of the House.
I support the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has shown great courage and duty and she has my admiration and respect for that. The Honourable Lady has various criticisms of her. I would stand our Prime Minister against her First Minister any day of the week.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local public services in Warrington have been slashed to pieces over the last 12 years, and we are finding it increasingly difficult to meet the demand for basic statutory services, let alone before inflation started rocketing, pushing costs of delivery up. Any more cuts will mean collapse. The Prime Minister spent last week promising no cuts to public spending and boasting about her 2-year energy price freeze. So does she have any say at all on government economic policy?
Leader of the House.
Well, the Honourable Lady can put her questions to the Chancellor shortly, but what I would point out is that clearly all organisations are facing rising costs. That is in part why we have acted so swiftly, and even today we'll be putting through legislation to help with the business and cost of living.
Richard Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been in office for 6 weeks, but notoriously, even with the rigours of the budget, is yet to find time to call the First Minister of Scotland or the First Minister of Wales. Does the Leader of the House think that the Prime Minister will remain in office long enough to be able to do so?
I know that the Prime Minister takes her responsibilities. committed to working constructively with the other administrations, and she will always do that.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the markets will be reassured to see the Prime Minister is not hiding under a desk but is here in the House today. She's still got till 10 o'clock tonight to answer questions that have been asked if she wants to reassure the markets and create some stability. But I've got another question for the Leader of the House. I've been drawing in Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. Can she guarantee that the current Prime Minister will be answering them?
Leader of the House.
Yes.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throwing your Chancellor under the bus in order to save your skin is not a tough decision. Tough decisions are when you make them and then come along, show true leadership and ask people to come with you by inspiring them. This Prime Minister has done none of that. So why should we follow her when she's shown no leadership whatsoever but is hidden away?
The House.
I think that if you spoke to any member of the Ukrainian Parliament, they would tell you that our Prime Minister has shown leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Urgent business, we are told by the Leader, prevented the Prime Minister from coming to the House. What on earth could have been more urgent than coming to atone for the economic chaos that she has wrought on pension holders and mortgage payers across these islands, and especially in Scotland, where the party opposite enjoy no mandate whatsoever? The Prime Minister thanked her former Chancellor for the excellent work that he had done. Can the Leader of the House explain, or maybe now the Prime Minister's turned up, she can the Leader of the House explain, thanked for what?
The honourable gentleman will know that the Prime Minister has Prime Minister's questions every single week. He can put questions to her there. There was very good reason, as I have repeatedly explained to the House, why she couldn't be here. You will notice that she is present here now. And I will start listening to the honourable gentleman on democratic mandates when he honours the results of the Scottish referendum.
Thank you very Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the House for her answers, but I'm not in the business of point scoring. Does the Leader of the House not agree that the face behind the budget is much less important than what the budget outlines? Is there confidence that the Chancellor can help business, help people stay in work, ensure that funding is available for the NHS and government departments cannot take further austerity, so that all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can truly be better together?
Well, the honourable gentleman is held in great affection by all members of this House and is often the finale at such UQs because he is full of common sense, and I think that what he says is absolutely right, and I hope now we will be able to hear from the Chancellor very shortly.
Point of order.
Is it relevant to the questions? Order. If it's relevant to this, I will take the point of order. Chris Brown.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, you know that for the last hour we've been listening to questions about which were meant to be directed to the Prime Minister. The Leader of the House said repeatedly that there were reasons that the Prime Minister couldn't be here. If there were legitimate reasons, I'm sure every single member of this House would want to hear them. Now that the Prime Minister has arrived, would this not be a perfect opportunity for her to be able to explain why she was not able to do it?
Just to say, and let's just put this to bed, it's not for me, it's for the government to put forward the ministers to respond to urgent questions once granted, and it's not a matter for the chair. The honourable member has put the point on the record, and I know that the Prime Minister is now in her place, but we now come, before I call the Chancellor to make his statement.
Just get up and tell us. Go on.
Mr. Bradshaw, I expect better. I want you to be silent while I read this out. This is very important. Before I call the Chancellor to make his statement, I would like... Does somebody... Yes, and I think so. It's a few times today. And that's the third apology. I don't want any more. Before I call the Chancellor to make his statement, I'd like to point out that British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. So I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the central responsibility of any government is to do what is necessary for economic stability. Behind the decisions we take and the issues on which we vote, our jobs families depend on, mortgages that have to be paid, savings for pensioners, and businesses investing for the future. We are a country that funds our promises and pays our debts. And when that is questioned, as it has been, this government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty. But I give the House and the public this assurance: every single one of those decisions, whether reductions in spending or increases in tax, will be shaped through core, compassionate, conservative values that will prioritise the needs of the most vulnerable. That is why I pay tribute to my predecessors for the energy price guarantee, for the furlough scheme, and indeed for earlier decisions to protect the NHS budget in a period when other budgets were being cut. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to be completely frank about the scale of the economic challenge we face. We have had short-term difficulties caused by the lack of an OBR forecast alongside the mini-budget. But there are also inflationary and interest pressures around the world. Russia's unforgivable invasion of Ukraine has caused energy and food prices to spike. We cannot control what is happening in the rest of the world, but when the interest of economic stability means the government needs to change course, we will do so. And that is what I have come to the House to announce today. In my first few days in the job, I've held extensive discussions with the Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues, the Governor of the Bank of England, the OBR, the head of the Debt Management Office, Treasury officials, and many others. The conclusion I've drawn from those conversations is that we need to do more quickly to give certainty to the markets about our fiscal plans and show through action and not just words that the United Kingdom can and always will pay our way in the world. We've therefore decided to make further changes to the mini-budget immediately, rather than waiting until the medium-term fiscal plan in 2 weeks' time, in order to reduce unhelpful speculation about those plans. Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for your agreement on the need to give the markets an early brief summary this morning, but I welcome the opportunity to give this House details of those decisions now. We've decided on the following changes to support confidence and stability. Firstly, the Prime Minister and I agreed yesterday to reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not been legislated for in Parliament. So we will continue with the abolition of the health and social care levy, changes to stamp duty, the increase in the annual investment allowance to £1 million and the wider reforms to investment taxes. But we will no longer be proceeding with the cuts to dividend tax rates, saving around £1 billion a year, the reversal of the off-payroll working reforms introduced in 2017 and 2021, saving around £2 billion a year, the new VAT-free shopping scheme for non-UK visitors, saving a further £2 billion a year, or the freeze on alcohol duty rates, saving around £600 million a year. I will provide further details on how those rates will be uprated.
Let's just sort this telephone out. I've just switched it off, all right? It's off. OK. Sorry, Chancellor. Carry on.
I will provide further details on how alcohol duty rates will be uprated shortly. Second, the Government is currently committed to cutting the basic rate of income tax to 19% in April of 2023. It is a deeply held Conservative value, a value that I share, that people should keep more of the money they earn, which is why we have continued with the abolition of the health and social care levy. But at a time when markets are asking serious questions about our commitment to sound public finances, we cannot afford a permanent, discretionary increase in borrowing worth £6 billion a year. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely until economic circumstances allow for it to be cut. Taken together with the decision not to cut corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax, the measures I've announced today will raise around £32 billion every year. The third step I'm taking today, Mr. Speaker, is to review the energy price guarantee. That was the biggest single expense in the growth plan and one of the most generous schemes in the world. It's a landmark policy for which I pay tribute to my predecessor, my right honourable friend from Spelthorne, and will support millions of people through a difficult winter, reducing inflation by up to 5%. So I confirm today that the support we are providing between now and April next year will not change. But beyond next April, the Prime Minister and I have reluctantly agreed it would not be responsible to continue exposing the public finances to unlimited volatility in international gas prices. So I'm announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. The review's objective is to design a new approach that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned, whilst ensuring enough support for those in need. Any support for businesses will be targeted to those most affected, and a new approach will better incentivise energy efficiency. There remain, I'm afraid, many difficult decisions to be announced in the medium-term fiscal plan on October the 31st. When I confirm that we will publish a credible, transparent, fully costed plan to get debt falling as a share of the economy over the medium term, based on the judgment and economic forecasts of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. I'd like to thank the OBR, whose Director Richard Hughes I met this morning, and the Bank of England, whose Governor Andrew Bailey I've now met twice. I fully support the vital independent roles both institutions play, which give markets, the public and the world confidence that our economic plans are credible and rightly hold us to account for delivering them. But I also want more independent expert advice as I start my journey as Chancellor. So I'm announcing today the formation of a new Economic Advisory Council to do just that. This council will advise the government on economic policy, with 4 names announced today: Rupert Harrison, former Chief of Staff to the Chancellor of the Exchequer; Gert-Jan Vlieger from Element Capital; Sushil Wadhwani of Wadhwani Asset Management; and Karen Ward of JP Morgan. Mr. Speaker, we remain completely committed to our mission to go for growth. But growth requires confidence and stability, which is why we are taking many difficult decisions starting today. But whilst we do need realism about the challenges ahead, we must never fall into the trap of pessimism. Despite all the adversity and challenge we face, there is enormous potential in this country with some of the most talented people, 3 of the world's top 10 universities, the most tech unicorns in Europe, one of the world's great financial centres, incredible strengths in the creative industries, in science, research, engineering, manufacturing and innovation. And all that gives me genuine optimism about our long-term prospects for growth. But to achieve that, it is vital we act now to create the stability on which future generations can build. The reason the United Kingdom has always succeeded is because at big and difficult moments we have taken tough decisions in the long-term interests of the country and in a way that is consistent with compassionate conservative values. That is what we will do now, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I regularly say now, I welcome the new Chancellor to his place. The 4th in 4 months of chaos and fiasco as this Conservative government spirals down the political plug hole. Yeah. But the damage has been done. This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, but ordinary working people are paying the price. All that is left after these humiliating U-turns are higher mortgages for working people and higher bonuses for bankers. And their climb down on energy support begs the question yet again, why won't they extend the windfall tax on energy producers to help foot the bill? Now, it is good to finally see the Prime Minister in her place, and not, as the Leader of the House had to assure us earlier,
under a desk. But, Mr. Speaker, what is she left with? No authority, no credibility, no plan for growth, and it is clear to see the people who caused the chaos cannot be the people to fix the chaos. They are out of ideas, out of touch, and out of time. Now, the Prime Minister should have spoke to the House today. But we know that she cannot do that with a shred of credibility, given that the survival of this government now depends on smashing to smithereens everything that she stands for. And now she is attempting to reverse everything that she campaigned on. It is not just impossible, it is absurd. The Prime Minister is barely in office and she is certainly not in power.
Very true.
Only 5 days ago, the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's Questions that there would be, and I quote, absolutely no public spending reductions. But after what we have heard from the Chancellor today, every single public service is again at risk from the Conservatives, from our NHS nurses to our schools to our servicemen and women, with the country paying the price for their incompetence. The Prime Minister said that she had an energy package for 2 years. Now that's being withdrawn on the very day it is supposed to be legislated for. The Prime Minister insisted that her Conservative mini-budget would lead the country to the promised land. Instead, it has led to the highest mortgages in 15 years and emergency interventions by the Bank of England to protect pensions. And then on Friday, the unedifying spectacle of the Chancellor being dragged back from the IMF before he could do any more damage to our economy. So she has turned to a new Chancellor, who finished 8th out of 8 in the Tory leadership contest, winning just 18 votes from MPs. The Tories have run out of credibility and now they are running out of chancellors. The latest office holder has been in the cabinet for 9 of the last 12 years, at the centre of a government responsible for low growth and weakened public services, and him responsible for helping run the NHS into the ground. He was a big part of austerity season 1, and now he says the cure is austerity season 2. And what, Mr. Speaker, was the Chancellor's flagship policy in his own short-lived leadership contest? To reduce corporation tax in a totally unfunded manner, not from 25% to 19%. The Right Honourable Gentleman called for it to be lowered to 15%, with not a single explanation of how it was to be paid for. The truth is, had he won the contest and implemented these policies, we would be in an even worse place than we are now. There is no mandate, there is no authority for any of this. The Conservatives have put a lasting premium on people's mortgages. Uncosted borrowing has sent interest rates spiralling. Millions of people's mortgage deals will be coming to an end in the next few months, leaving many families forking out £500 or more a month. People will be paying a Tory mortgage premium for years to come. So how does the Chancellor think ordinary people can possibly afford any more of this Conservative government? We've heard no answers today. Now, the Chancellor has said that growth requires confidence and stability. I agree. But where does he think the lack of confidence and the lack of stability has come from? It didn't come from the sky, Mr. Speaker. It came from the mini-budget 3 weeks ago. And what does it say about our country? That we are watching borrowing costs hour by hour. That's not the sign of a strong G7 economy. It is the exact opposite. Businesses are now saying that things are so unstable that they are pausing investment here in Britain. The former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Charles Bean, has outlined the extraordinary damage that the Conservatives have done to our standing. In his words, we've moved from looking not too dissimilar from the US or Germany to looking more like Italy and Greece. What a mess. And where is the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast? Has this government learnt nothing? Does the Chancellor really expect the country to take everything from him at face value? Last week, the Business Secretary was busy undermining the Office for Budget Responsibility. Today, we have received another massive fiscal statement with no forecast. What has this government got to hide? They should publish the numbers so that we know the true state of the public finances after 40 days of this Prime Minister and after 12 years of Conservative governments. Now, today the Chancellor has scaled back help with energy bills for families and pensioners. It begs the question, yet again, why won't they bring in a proper windfall tax on energy producers to help foot the bill for consumers? And when will the current Chancellor publish in full the government's estimates of windfall profits of the energy giants over the next 2 years? Now, no one was talking about spending cuts until the Tories crashed the economy with their mini-budget. So I asked the Chancellor, why should the British people pay the economic price for the Tories' mistakes, and what spending cuts does the government plan to make? We believe that the government must honour its commitments to uprate benefits and pensions in line with inflation. Will the Chancellor make it clear today that that is what he intends to do? And what a contrast, that cuts to benefits are still on the table, but the one thing the Chancellor couldn't bring himself to reverse today was lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses. Why is this the last policy standing in this disastrous mini-budget? And let me come to credibility. Does the Chancellor accept that once credibility and trust have been destroyed, it cannot be simply regained by a series of zigzagging, chaotic U-turns? Will he and the Prime Minister apologise for the costs and anxieties laid on families? Can he admit once and for all that the market turmoil we are in was directly caused by the disastrous decisions of his predecessor and of the Prime Minister? Can he guarantee that the Bank of England won't have to intervene again to save the government? And what guarantee can he give to people about their pensions, about their mortgages and their household bills? The Chancellor said today that everything is now on the table. But is that really the case? We know that abolishing the non-dom tax status will raise £3 billion a year, yet there was no mention of that today. How can it be right that some of the richest individuals in society are allowed to buy their way out of paying tax that should be paid here in Britain? This would not be an eye-wateringly difficult decision, Mr. Speaker, so why doesn't the government just do it? There is lasting damage, which these policy U-turns won't change. They've set fire to everything. Now they insist it is all fine. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, an arsonist is still an arsonist, even if he runs back into a burning building with a bucket of water. Because they can't be trusted. The Tories are clinging on for themselves regardless of the cost to the country. Trickle-down economics will always fail. What drives forward our economy are the talents and efforts of millions of working people and thousands of ordinary businesses. The government's economic credibility has been destroyed. They have harmed our economic institutions. People are paying higher mortgages. The same set of people doing U-turns isn't going to fix it. The only way to change this is a real change in government.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions, and I'm sorry that, given the speed at which things moved at the weekend, I haven't had time to sit down with her one-to-one as would normally be the practice before parliamentary exchanges. Now, I understand the role opposition parties play. I've stood at that dispatch box myself. But behind the rhetoric, and I was listening very carefully, I don't think she disagreed with a single one of the decisions that I announced to Parliament. And that is important for the country and markets to know. And I think there is also agreement on the process of policy making. I support the independence of the Bank of England, introduced by Gordon Brown, and I know she supports the independence of the OBR set up by George Osborne. The whole government supports the independence of those two important institutions. Now, I fully accept, and I don't think I could have been more clear, that we have had to change some decisions made in the last few weeks. But what I reject wholeheartedly is her broader narrative about Conservative economic management. Let me remind her that the UK's unemployment rate is the lowest since 1974. That's below France, Italy, Canada, Belgium, Sweden, Spain and the Netherlands, and massively lower than 2010. Let me remind her that since 2010, our growth rate has been the third highest in the G7. She may not want to hear this, but these are the economic facts. Our growth growth rate since this party came into power has been higher than Germany, France, Italy and Japan, and faster than any G7 country this year. Looking to the future, we have the largest technology sector in Europe, more foreign direct investment than anywhere in Europe bar one country. That is a legacy to be proud of. Now, I was listening carefully for some questions about the measures that I announced, but she didn't ask any, and I think she agreed with them. But I will pick her up on one point. She talked about the NHS. Let me tell her, maybe they don't want to listen about the NHS. She talked about the NHS. Because of the global financial crisis which happened on her party's watch, the NHS went through one of its most difficult periods ever, and this party protected the NHS budget. Then in 2017, we were able to give it its biggest single increase in funding because of the difficult decisions that we took and that party opposed. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we inherited a financial crisis, we dealt with a global pandemic, we've led the world in support of Ukraine, possible because of difficult decisions taken over the last 12 years, each and every one opposed by the party opposite. So if she is preaching today the need for fiscal credibility, which I warmly welcome, can I just tell her this? The true test will be in 2 weeks' time to see whether she supports public spending restraint. I've shown Conservatives can raise taxes. Will she show Labour are willing to restrain spending?
Chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. It was both frank and bold, and it appears, in the very short term at least, to have steadied the markets. One point that my right honourable friend raised at the dispatch box, though was absent from his statement earlier today, was his renewed commitment to our financial institutions, particularly the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility. He has also now brought forward the Economic Advisory Council, a number of members of which have appeared before the Treasury Select Committee, and I think he has chosen well. But could he reassure the House that in no way the Economic Advisory Council will in any way conflict with the Bank of England or the Office of Budget Responsibility, the FCA, the PRA and all of our institutions, and that it will be there to complement, not work against any of those institutions?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman who has spoken very wisely in recent weeks about the difficult issues that we face. I can absolutely give him that assurance. I want to be frank to make sure that I'm getting advice from fantastic institutions like the Treasury, the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility, but also advice that is independent of those institutions, because that is the way we'll get the best result. Rupert Harrison in particular has enormous experience of running the Treasury under George Osborne over many years. I think he'll make a very important contribution, as will his colleagues on the Council. And with respect to the markets, he's absolutely right to be cautious about what happens. They go up as well as they go down, and no government can control or should seek to control the markets. What we can do is the things within our power, and that is a commitment, a very firm and clear commitment to fiscal responsibility.
Come to SNP spokesperson Alison Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see the Prime Minister has been urgently running off to something else rather than staying to listen. Mr. Speaker, when the previous Chancellor came to give his mini-budget 3 long weeks ago, I called it economic chaos. What an understatement that turned out to be. I'm not sure words have yet been invented to describe the scale of the unmitigated disaster which the Prime Minister and her Chancellors have created in the past 24 days. We're back where we started, significantly worse off due to Tory incompetence. And isn't it just as well that in Scotland, the Scottish Government didn't take the advice of Tory MPs to copy and paste before the front bench here deletes all? And people will be paying the price for this for many years to come through higher interest and borrowing rates. Will he apologise for this increased cost that his colleagues have inflicted upon people? And he has not been clear at all. Will he confirm the status of the banker's bonus cap? Has it been scrapped or has it not been scrapped? There is little by way of detail from the current Chancellor on doubling down on austerity and what that will mean for people. But the Institute for Government and SIPFA have been clear that there is no fat left to cut after a lost decade for public services under the Tories. So where does the current Chancellor expect to make these cuts, these efficiency savings? We know what he means when he says it. We already know the terrible price of austerity because Glasgow Centre for Population Health have attributed 330,000 excess deaths to Tory austerity policies, an unacceptable human cost. Again and again, the Tories bring forward harmful policies they never feel the consequences of. And we know that guarantees mean nothing under the Tories either. The so-called energy price guarantee turns out to be worth 6 months, not 2 years, a cliff edge looming next April. National Energy Action have said that many vulnerable people were holding on by their fingertips. Government must be very, very careful it doesn't prize them away. So can you tell us exactly what will happen for households in April? The scale of increases make almost everybody vulnerable, except perhaps his banker pals. And what will happen to the most vulnerable when inflation soars as a result of the return of spiralling energy costs? The previous Chancellor never got around to telling me what will happen to business energy costs at the end of their 6-month reprieve. So can the current Chancellor tell me what support businesses signing impossibly expensive contracts as we speak can expect? And will this current Chancellor, as the former Chancellor did, commit to uprating benefits with the rate of inflation? And we also increase support to those languishing in the asylum system and end the punishing no recourse to public funds regime? Will he cancel the benefit cap and scrap the 2-child limit, which is trapping so many children in poverty? Where is his compassion for them? Will he invest in renewables, carbon capture and storage, and a comprehensive energy efficiency and installation package? And finally, Mr Speaker, does he really understand, when looking at broken Britain, the chaos that the Tories have wreaked and the prospect of a bleak Brexit future under both Labour and the Tories, that more and more of Scotland's people are looking at the comprehensive independence prospectus set out by the First Minister today and moving towards the vision of a fairer, greener, more prosperous Scotland back in the heart of Europe where we belong?
Well, Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to exchange comments with the Honourable Lady. I look forward to working with her closely in the months ahead. I would remind her that this Conservative government is spending £37 billion this year to support people across the United Kingdom with cost of living concerns. That is possible because of difficult economic decisions that the SNP have opposed at nearly every stage, and that includes large support for businesses up and down the country. But the main thing I would say to her, very gently, is that she cannot claim to be concerned about the economic turmoil of the last few weeks, when the central policy of the SNP, independence, would leave turmoil for Scotland, not for a few weeks, but for many, many years to come. A new currency, somehow finding a way to trade with the UK internal market, but also the European single market. Border checks between England and Scotland, as announced today by the First Minister. A massive gap in public finances that would have to be breached. That is a recipe for precisely the austerity she says she's worried about. Let me say this. If we want economic stability, if Scotland wants economic stability, to coin a phrase, we are stronger together.
Sir John Redwood.
What will the impact of these measures be on the growth rate, and will we still avoid recession?
I will publish the economic forecasts from the OBR when I make my statement in a fortnight's time, and I think it's better for me to wait until I hear that. But the proper answer to his question is that what we are seeking is long-term sustainable increase in the economic growth rate, and that is a central policy of the Prime Minister, which has my wholehearted support.
Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the country is feeling a sense of relief that trickle-down economics has been so quickly abandoned. But there was one element in the mini-budget which the new Chancellor did not address, and that was the issue of investment zones. That is we have great evidence all over the place about how that as a mechanism for encouraging growth and jobs and prosperity has failed from the Thatcher years onward. All that happens is they're incredibly expensive, we lose income from them, they only lead to the transfer of jobs from one poor area to the other, and they are a massive opportunity for every kleptocrat, oligarch and criminal to launder money into the UK. Will the Chancellor abandon that policy too?
Well, I would like to say that I have a great deal of respect for the campaigning the Right Honourable Lady has done over many years against people illicitly hiding wealth and not paying their share of tax. And I do totally support the benefits that investment zones can bring, but we will implement that policy in a way that learns the lessons of when models that are similar have been tried in the past, and we will make sure that they are successful.
Matt Hancock. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the return of an ironclad fiscal responsibility, albeit within the most velvet of gloves. For there can be no growth without economic credibility. But will he answer this question? When he brings forward the forecasts in a fortnight, made independently by the Office for Budget Responsibility, will he guarantee now that they will show debt falling as a proportion of our income, and show that once we have the finances fully under control, we will not be borrowing for day-to-day spending, because you cannot put the nation's spending on the never-never?
Yes and yes.
Ed Davey.
Speaker, people are already suffering from the damage caused by this government's economic mistakes. Hundreds of pounds now added to mortgage bills, pushing millions of families to the brink, on top of higher food prices, higher fuel costs and higher energy bills. But despite that, the Chancellor refuses to undo one of the government's biggest injustices: its failure to impose a proper windfall tax on the record profits of the oil and gas companies, earned only because Putin is killing innocent Ukrainians. After so many U-turns, surely the Chancellor can persuade the Prime Minister to do one more. Will he introduce a proper windfall tax and help struggling families?
Let me tell the Right Honourable Gentleman, I am not against the principle of taxing profits that are genuine windfalls, but as he will know very well, in the energy industry, it is a very cyclical industry, and there are businesses that have periods of feast and famine, and you have to be very careful that you don't tax companies in a way that drives away investment. So we have said that nothing is off the table.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate my right honourable friend on his statement today, which is both wise and necessary. And there will be great relief across the House that the markets have responded positively to my right honourable friend's statement, not least thanks to his economic leadership and political skill. In the run-up to the 31st of October, will he reassure us and the markets that the Treasury and the OBR and the Independent Bank of England will be working closely together and in total lockstep?
I absolutely want to give him that reassurance, and I also want to thank him as someone who has enormous experience as to how the city works for the advice that he gave me over the weekend. I think one of the best things about the economic structures we have is the interaction between institutions which have independence and are able to give independent advice, and Treasury and the government, and it has helped create stability, and I hope that what I've said today will bolster that further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Chancellor on his appointment, and I hope he lasts longer than his predecessors. Well, no. 5 million people will see their mortgages go up And the mini-budget fiasco means that on average £500 more in payment, and in London nearly 900. Can the Chancellor assure us that he's going to look at how he can take that additional Prime Minister's mortgage premium off people's bills and take action to protect them in these difficult times? And if he can't, should they send the bill to him?
Let me say to the Honourable Lady that we have an absolute responsibility as a government to do everything we can to hold increases in mortgage rates down as much as is possible insofar as the government has an influence on them through its own actions. And that is why I've taken, I think, very strong and quick steps to demonstrate this government's commitment to fiscal balance. But we are in a world in which, unfortunately, interest rates are going up everywhere, and everyone is having to deal with increases in mortgage rates, and we are thinking about the challenge for people who have those mortgages, but I want to make sure that that does not happen as a result of actions by this government.
Kevin Hollingray.
Can I welcome all the measures in his statement today? I think it's absolutely right that we look for better value for the taxpayer through spending restraints. But can he confirm any cuts to spending will not impact on capital expenditure, infrastructure expenditure, particularly across the north, and that will fully deliver on projects that we've already committed to, such as Northern Powerhouse Rail?
As my honourable friend will know, sorry, my voice is a bit croaky at the moment because I've been probably talking too much over the last few days. But as my honourable friend will know, there are very important projects that we all care about a great deal. But given the severity of the situation at the moment, we are not taking anything off the table, whether tax increases or spending reductions. But I don't believe it is possible. I don't believe it is possible to have a long-term, credible economic growth strategy that doesn't recognise the vital importance of capital spending.
Siobhan MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even a screeching U-turn can't repair the damage when we've already had the crash. But when the Chancellor dismantled Trussonomics overnight, why on earth did he decide to carry on boosting bankers' bonuses in the heart of a cost of living crisis?
Because the policy didn't work, and we will get more tax from rich bankers with the policy we now have.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's statement. If there are further steps that are required, will he do whatever it takes to restore the UK's fiscal credibility?
I will.
Samuel Wilson.
First of all, can I welcome the appointment of the Chancellor and wish him well in his job, because his success on his success depends the success of all of our constituents in meeting the cost of living. Whilst inflation cannot be blamed on the government because it's an international, and whilst interest rates are going up across the world, the one thing which the Chancellor is fully responsible for is today's increase in taxation, which will take money from people at a vital time, enabling them to not able to pay their bills or their investment plans. I assume he has done some economic modelling in this. What impact does he believe it will have on growth and on the burden of debt in relation to GDP over the next 2 years?
Well, he asked a very important question, and I want to remind him that what I have announced to date has been very largely the cancellation of planned tax cuts rather than actual new tax increases. And this has a very important impact in a positive direction on national finances, but unfortunately it won't be the end of the story. If we're going to deliver a credible budget in which we can demonstrate, as my right honourable friend asked earlier, that debt is falling as a percentage of GDP by the end of the period, then we're going to have further difficult decisions ahead, and this government won't shirk from them.
Helen Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A pandemic followed by a war. Our constituents do not expect this time to be easy. But they do expect us to set out the difficult choices, to make the difficult choices, and then set out the path for a better future. Can I ask my right honourable friend, particularly in considering his experiences of many years, to continue to press ahead with our commitment to reform social care, knowing as he does that social care and the NHS go hand in hand, and again how important they are to our constituents.
Well, she and I have had very many discussions on social care over the years, mainly when I've been a backbencher and she's been a minister. And it is a sector that is in great difficulty at the moment. I'm very aware of those concerns. I'm also very aware of the pressures in the NHS at the moment. I'm not making any commitments as to what exactly we will do, but as I said earlier, all these decisions will be taken through the prism of what matters most to the people who need the help the most.
Dame Angela Edel.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has put a brutal end to the self-proclaimed new era of Trussonomics with his announcements, and he's taken away £32 billion worth of planned tax cuts. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that still leaves a £30 billion hole in his sums, and if rumours are correct, it could be as high as £40 billion if the OBR calculations that I've heard about are correct. That means surely, doesn't it, Mr. Speaker, austerity 2.0 of at least the same size as the first level of austerity we had from 2010 to 2015. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor must know that public services simply cannot deal with that level of cuts when they've been so weakened by austerity, the first round of austerity.
Let me say to the right honourable lady, I was a cabinet minister in 2010 when we had very difficult decisions to take in the wake of the financial crisis, and my department's budget was cut by 24%. And I don't believe we are talking about anything of that scale, and I think it's likely that cash spending will continue to go up. But that said, I want to be completely frank with people. We are going to have very difficult decisions both on tax and spending in the next couple of weeks. We will try and take those decisions as compassionately as possible. So it's going to be tough going forward, but I don't expect it to be on the scale that she suggests.
Sir Edward Lee.
I congratulate the Chancellor on his soothing and competent tone, and of course we've got to calm the markets, but what is our vision? Of course we accept the shortcomings. Of course we accept the shortcomings of the mini-budget, but does he accept we can't just slide into a sort of second-rate economy and go in the direction of France with a bloated public sector, the higher taxes for 70 years, gross inefficiencies. So by the time of the next election, can we as a Conservative Party promise to get taxation back, at least the level it was when we started this Parliament, and get corporation back to one of the most competitive in Europe? Otherwise, what is the point of the Conservative Party?
Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker, with all the noises we're getting from the party opposite. This compassionate Conservative government was able to step in with massive help from members of the public with the furlough scheme, with the energy price guarantee, because we took difficult decisions on the economy in the years that preceded it, each and every one that was opposed by the party opposite. I say to my right honourable friend that the point of a Conservative government is to build a strong economy. That's what we will do. It's the job. It's an important point I wish to make, Mr. Speaker. It is the job of the Chancellor not just to balance the books, but also to have a vision for economic growth. And I hope I will persuade him in 2 weeks' time that I have just that.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Chancellor agree with the Prime Minister, who confirmed that the state pension would rise with inflation in April? And if he does agree, can he commit to it today?
Well, I'm very aware of how many vulnerable pensioners there are and the importance of the triple lock. But as I said earlier, I'm not making any commitments on any individual policy areas. But every decision we take will be taken through the prism of what matters most to the most vulnerable.
Mark Harper.
very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his robust defence of Conservative economic policy over the last 12 years? More of that, please. And my inner chartered accountant can't but help welcome the fact that he's reassured me that it is the Treasury's job, essential task, to make sure the sums add up. Yeah. Can I ask him a little bit about the review of the energy price guarantee? It's right, I think, to focus taxpayer support on those that need it most, but can I draw to his attention that 1/7 of the population are not on the gas grid. 40% of my constituents are not. As he designs that system to protect the most vulnerable, can he make sure it works for everyone in the country, wherever they live and however they heat their homes?
Well, I look forward to lots of useful advice from his inner accountant over the months and years ahead. I will certainly bear that point in mind. The issue with the revised scheme that we want to announce for the energy price guarantee is that I think most people agree with the logic of targeting support where it's needed the most, but we need a scheme that works practically and is not actually particularly easy to design that kind of scheme. So we're going to do as much work as we can, and we'll announce what we're going to do as soon as we can, but we'll certainly bear in mind the points he made.
John MacDonald.
The backdrop to today's statement isn't just the chaos of the last fortnight. It is also a report of 3 weeks ago that demonstrated, as a result of austerity, there has been over 300,000 excess deaths. Can I ask him in his preparations for the 31st of October that he recognises that unless he increases benefits by at least the rate of inflation, there will be more excess deaths and suffering?
He will know, because I've said it many times today, that I'm not making firm commitments on any individual elements of tax and spending, but I hope he is reassured that I've been very clear about the values through which we will take those decisions.
Mr. Early.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend. He has hit the ground running in his job. These are difficult decisions. They're the correct decisions right now. We all aspire to tax cuts in the future, but he's right that we actually have to have the money to pay for those. But could I ask him, as he prepares for the 31st of October, to look in detail at how we address what is the most, in my view, deep-rooted problem this country faces and has done for decades, which is our current account deficit. We will not truly get rid of these issues until we restore a better balance in our national finances. Can I ask him to make that a priority?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and I agree. Ultimately, it is not sustainable to have a permanent current account deficit, and that is something we need to address.
Bentley.
The Chancellor announced that he will be reviewing the energy price guarantee. But does the government have any plans to review the level of support offered to off-grid properties with the cost of the heating bills this winter? There is cross-party consensus that the £100 payment is inadequate to meet the rising level of bills. So will he bring forward further support in advance of this winter?
Well, I've listened carefully to what the honourable gentleman said, as I did to my honourable friend from Forest of Dean, and we will certainly look carefully at what can be done for off-grid properties.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the necessary but vigorous course corrections that my right honourable friend has introduced. He began his statement by saying that the central responsibilities of any government, they also include security, defence of Britain, support to our allies and standing up to our adversaries as we've done so in Ukraine. My right honourable friend knows the world's getting more dangerous, not less. Will he commit to continuing that promise of 3% GDP defence spend?
Well, it won't be a secret to my right honourable friend that I'm sympathetic to that, because I've campaigned for it when I was a backbencher very loudly and visibly, but all of these things have to be sustainable. Any increase in defence spending has to be an increase that we can sustain over very many years. Let me just say to him today that I agree with him entirely that the duty of a government is security for the population in all senses of the word.
Steve McKay.
Thank you. Does the Chancellor's compassionate conservatism
extend to raising the minimum income.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Christys here on GBNews Live. What did you make of that? Loads of different elements to get stuck into there. Of course, that was Chancellor Jeremy Hunt addressing MPs in the House of Commons. Now, a few bits and bobs to whiz you through here. He confirmed plans to scrap almost all of the tax-cutting measures announced in the mini-budget in September, so big news there. He also said the government would also scale back its energy price guarantee. Rather than lasting for 2 years, it will now run until April. And after then, there will be a Treasury-led review to see how those most in need can be helped, so targeted, really. He also said short-term difficulties in the UK economy were caused by the lack of an Office for Budget Responsibility forecast alongside the so-called mini-budget. So a bit of a dig there, but I suppose also saying what everybody knew. Now, of course, there was the urgent question before that and the high drama, really, of where is Liz Truss? Where was Liz Truss? She then came down and sat behind Penny Mordaunt for a bit, sat next to Jeremy Hunt for a while and then disappeared. I believe she was in the chamber for a grand total of 29 minutes. Not particularly looking great as well, it must be said. Joining me now to analyse the political elements of this is Reem Ibrahim, a political commentator and Conservative Party member. I've also got senior GB News contributor Tim Montgomery. Our business and economics editor Liam Halligan joins me. It's a proper panel, this, people. I'll go political, then I'll go economic. So, Tim, I'll start with you and we'll work our way back down the line. Truss didn't look great.
Almost like a
ghost.
I was worried about her. Almost like a ghost, Patrick. And we shouldn't forget this massive political and economic high drama here.
Yeah.
But I think we're witnessing something of a personal tragedy.
Yeah.
As well. We're seeing someone who only a few weeks ago became Prime Minister. And look, many viewers will be saying, well, she brought all this upon herself, and maybe she did. Others will be more sympathetic. But the fact is, this is public humiliation on a grand scale. And any normal person would be affected by this, and she does look like she's really battered.
Yeah, it was hard to watch at times.
It really was.
Reem, a poll dropped about 23 minutes ago that showed that Labour were some 36 points ahead in the polls at the minute. Quite shocking, really.
Of course it's shocking. I mean, we're looking at these polls at the moment. We're looking at, with Jeremy Hunt's statement, we're seeing that the economics is pretty similar to what we had about 7 weeks ago. The only difference is now that we haven't got Boris Johnson, so we haven't got that charismatic party leader, and so we're seeing these significant drops in the polls. So nothing's changed in terms of economic policy. We're back to square one, back to that 70-year high in the tax burden. But now what we have instead is a significant drop in the polls and pretty much an easy Labour win at the next election.
And Tim, what do you reckon to Penny Mordaunt's performance at the dispatch box there? She did look quite prime ministerial, it must be said.
She looked good, but I think that line that she dwelt on, the Prime Minister's not hiding under a desk. Now, if you want people to think of an image, you do not plant that image in people's heads.
Yeah, like, don't think of a pink elephant.
Exactly. And if I was a Truss supporter in Downing Street, I wouldn't be happy that Penny Mordaunt left that image hanging in people's minds. That was a bit naughty.
A little bit naughty. Liam Halligan, there we go. He's been sitting here the whole time watching all of Jeremy Hunt's speech there. What do you make of that, then? I mean, is he now the steady hand on the tiller?
I'd like to just endorse Tim's comments about the personal tragedy that we're seeing. I mean, I've been WhatsApping my kids today. They follow politics a bit and saying, look, we can all be really cynical about politics, but most people come into politics to do good, to do the right thing. Some people go a bit by the wayside, but this is going to be really hard for the Prime Minister. She is a human being, whatever your sort of political animus. A few little policy things I thought came out of the questioning there of Jeremy Hunt, Patrick. The first was he was asked whether or not the pensions triple lock would be honoured. That'll be important to lots of our viewers and listeners. And he said, he's not going to write the budget now. He can't guarantee that that's going to happen. What does that mean? The triple lock means that pensions should be going up in April by the rate of inflation in September, which is 9.9%, because that's what happened in April 2022 when pensions only went up by the previous September's inflation, which was 3.1%, by which time inflation was much higher. If the Tories don't follow through on that pensions triple lock, there will be a lot of very, very angry voters and Conservative activists. The other little policy thing I picked out, just listening there, Jeremy Hunt was asked by Tobias Ellwood, of course, who's part of the Defence Select Committee, very, very close to our armed services, whether or not he could guarantee the 3% of GDP defence spending, this new limit. Very much a centrepiece of Liz Truss's policy platform, obviously influenced by the strong support by the government for the Ukrainian troops and so on, and concerns about Russian belligerence. And it was a very cryptic answer, I thought, which I think canny reporters may pick up on in the newspapers. The duty of any country is security to our citizens in all senses of the word. Now, that's not just military security. He's also talking about financial security and stability. So I thought that was less than a guarantee, even though we know Jeremy Hunt is very much pro this. He spent ages as a backbencher campaigning for a 3% of GDP defence spending minimum. And now I thought he just sprinkled a little bit of doubt on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just in terms, Reem, of Truss's ability or legitimacy, really, to carry on. I mean, she walked in to the Commons late than expected. She sat down there, looked a bit out of it, to be honest with you, and then got up and left 29 minutes later whilst her Chancellor, a new Chancellor, essentially politically castrated her other Chancellor in the House of Commons. Can she carry on like this?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, if it looks like a coup and sounds like a coup, it probably is a coup. And, you know, what we're seeing at the moment now, we saw Liz Truss sort of walk in. I want to echo those comments about her concern for
I hope she's all right.
Her sort of personal well-being. But also, she walked in looking like a ghost, and she said, it's, to my understanding, it's a result of parliamentary procedure that she couldn't then go up and sort of answer questions herself. But we had the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, answering the urgent questions. Then you had a statement from Jeremy Hunt, our Chancellor, and Liz Truss walked in and walked out without saying a word. I mean, obviously it's a result of parliamentary procedure, but, you know, the optics around that aren't very good.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I believe that we are joined now, I think, by Mark Littlewood from the IEA, the Institute for Economic Affairs, and a little bit of Jeremy Hunt for good measure there on the side. Thank you very much. Mark Littlewood is the Director General of that free market think tank, the IEA. Now, of course, you were calling initially for something relatively similar to what Liz Truss initially wanted. I just was hoping that you might be able to paint a picture of what could have been, Mark, because we're back to the status quo now, aren't we, really?
We are a bit, Patrick. I mean, I'm all for the vision of Liz Truss and her departed Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, that the UK needs to get public spending down, needs to get taxes down, and needs to deregulate to bring about growth. That won't sort things out immediately, but we've been on the wrong path for too long. And you might argue it's been exacerbated by the Kwarteng-Truss duo not showing any sort of fiscal constraint or showing any numbers about how we're going to get somewhere approaching a balanced budget. Jeremy Hunt today has at least shown some fiscal constraint. You'll remember when this huge energy package was announced, actually, a good number of us on the free market side came out opposing it. Very tragically, the Queen died about, I think, 3 or 4 hours after the announcement. That's now being rowed back on. That's probably, I mean, I'm doing the calculations in my head, but potentially tens of billions of pounds worth of savings. So we do actually have a Chancellor who's now pointing to savings, and he's being in a certain sort of grim but rather honest way, challenging people both on the Conservative side and I think on the other side of the House. Where are the other savings going to come from? Now, none of these are easy, but I hope we can get away from the fantasy economics, that we can kind of ring fence everything. If you want benefits to go up with inflation and the triple lock to stay and NHS spending to go up to help us through the winter, at some point you need to find economies on the spending side. And actually, what Jeremy Hunt said today, I think, shows how bad the sequencing of the Truss government was. Really, they should have started by saying, here's where we're going to bring spending under control. I'd like them to bin HS2, for example. That would be a few tens of billions of pounds more. If we do that, we can get taxes down, which we think will help growth. But we at least seem to now be talking in terms of trying to get somewhere close to a balanced budget. And that was the piece that was missing from the Truss-Kwarteng duo act.
Yes, indeed. And it will be interesting to see how this reaction goes for Jeremy Hunt. You know Liz Truss quite well, personally, really. And we were all quite concerned for her, the way that she looks today. I'm just wondering if you could maybe have any insight, really, as to maybe how she's feeling at the minute. And she didn't look particularly good, bless her.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't actually spoken to her since she became Prime Minister, but I've known her over a good number of years. I mean, I'm feeling pretty ghastly on her behalf. So God only knows what she's going through. I mean, these are grim, grim times indeed. Pretty much the entirety of her proposals have unravelled before her eyes. I mean, I was looking at the betting market. She's heavily odds on to be out by the end of the year. Were that to prevail, she'd be the shortest serving Prime Minister ever. It's an absolutely desperate situation for her. She has in part been unlucky. She was dealt a brutally difficult hand. But I do have to say, although I consider her a friend and to some degree an ally, if you're dealt a very poor hand in a game of cards, you need to play it perfectly to have any chance of winning. And there were a number of missteps here in terms of how they sequence things, I think on their priorities. I mean, I'm all in favour of getting rid of the 45p top rate of income tax, but I'm not sure it's the hill I would have picked to die on. It's a rounding error. So they kind of went for shock and awe as in the first sort of week after the mourning period has finished, and that's blown back at them terribly in both economic and political terms. Whether she can survive after that, I think, is an open question. But I feel deeply sorry for her. But to some degree, it's missteps that she and her government have made. It's not just bad luck. And I'm afraid politics is a very brutal business. That's the way it is.
Yes, Mark, look, thank you very much. Thank you for making the time for us as well. Mark Littlewood there is the Director General of the Free Market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Great to have your input on the show there. Liam, I'll throw it back over to you, really, on that one. You've heard what Mark had to say there. Look, the IEA, it's no secret, obviously, we're quite allied to Truss's initial economic output, as it were. That has now significantly changed, and if she's had that as a centrepiece, I mean, realistically, her time is now limited, one would have.
Yeah, I thought that's very well put by Mark Littlewood. He's known her since university. They were Lib Dems together,
they were,
ironically, and yet, you know, he was
made that sound more exciting than it was.
You got to work with the material you've got, Patrick. Daytime TV, come on. He was very professional in his assessment, but also very humane, I thought.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to pick up from the Commons debate as Jeremy Hunt was talking. He was responding to Rachel Reeves. A big part of what we've seen since we've been watching the Commons has been that statement by the Shadow Chancellor, who I think, you know, she is a credible figure. She passes what you call the boardroom sniff test. You know, she's an ex-Bank of England economist. She's she's a financially literate person. A lot of people in business I talk to, they can imagine her as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, whereas they couldn't imagine, say, John McDonnell as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Corbyn's ally. And Jeremy Hunt came back at her with quite a clever phrase, I thought. She can support tax rises, he said, because Rachel Reeves has obviously backed this retreat from the mini-budget, even though Labour had backed almost all the mini-budget in its entirety beforehand. But can she show public spending constraint in 2 weeks' time? So that's the Chancellor saying, as a sort of rejoinder to the Shadow Chancellor, there will be public spending constraint in 2 weeks' time, which, of course, is the day of the medium-term financial strategy. So just a kind of warning shot there from the Chancellor that there is going to be some very, very tough decisions and there will be public spending cuts.
Yeah, 100%. Tim, it's difficult for Truss now, surely, because no one can really believe what she says. She U-turns left, right and centre and then replaces a Chancellor, doesn't really turn up. Apparently, there's a very good reason why she wasn't there. We'll have to give her the benefit of the doubt on that one. She certainly didn't look right as well, bless her. I mean, she's a bit of a lame duck now, isn't she?
Well, completely. And as Liam has just said, it's now clear from what the Chancellor said this afternoon that there will be public spending constraint in 2 weeks' time. Well, at Prime Minister's question time last week, when Keir Starmer asked her, was there going to be public spending cuts, she said absolutely not.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know whether Labour produced the video for social media yet. Well, they've certainly produced one or two, but the number of times she said something is for sure, something is forever, and she'd retreated days or hours later, whether it's the position of her Chancellor, whether it's the 45p tax rate, whether it's the corporation tax, whether it's public spending. Can anyone now believe a word that she says?
This is it.
And I think that is why we are probably hours or days away from the end of her premiership.
Yes, and I do feel sorry for her because it's, you know, a difficult time for anyone to come to the helm. But, Reem, I think we were talking a bit whilst there was rather a lot of chat from our Chancellor there about the comms being quite bad. I mean, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng dropped a bit of a political and economic grenade and then just disappeared pretty much for a while. There was the Labour Party conference. I was sat there just watching Labour fill this void with whatever lines they wanted about this.
Exactly.
Nothing coming back.
Exactly.
A U-turn on the day of the Chancellor's speech at Tory Party conference. The comms, they've been non-existent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also sort of about communicating these ideas to the public. I mean, Truss tried to do this at Conservative Party conference in her Wednesday sort of prime ministerial speech, where she explained, you know, tax cuts are there because people need more of their own money in their own pockets. We've got small businesses that are, you know, expecting this tax rebate from the reversal in corporation tax. So I think it's about communicating those ideas. But you're absolutely right. When the budget dropped, it was, we've done all of these things and there is no reasoning behind it. We've just done it and we're going to move on. There was no explanation behind it. And I think that's sort of that in combination with there not being any forecast.
There's also been no acknowledgement of what the country's been through. People have been frightened about what's happened. And, like, the speech was OK at party conference from Liz Truss.
Yeah, it's fine.
But it could have been given before the mini-budget was delivered.
Yes.
You know, it didn't acknowledge...
No contrition.
No contrition.
Yeah.
And that's... The British people are forgiving people. If actually you come clean with them and say, I've made a mistake, but I'm determined to get it right, I'm sorry, always the partisans won't give you grace. But the average person will say, OK, this person's trying, they're new to the job, give them a second chance.
I don't think
but there hasn't even been that attempt to level with people. And that's
this comms, as we call it, political communications point, is a very, very important one. Tim and I are old enough to remember when Alistair Campbell was in Downing Street. I was a political correspondent then. We remember before him Charles Lewington for the Conservative Party, even Bernard Ingham for Margaret Thatcher.
We're showing our age now.
But these were very, very effective political operatives who play a key role in government, message discipline, seeing round corners, making sure obvious things aren't missed, and being a Prime Minister's eyes and ears. I don't even know who that person is in this government, and if I don't know, then that's a big problem.
And Liam as well, and I'm not going to reveal exactly who this person is that said this to me, but I was speaking to somebody who has a very similar job to that with Liz Truss's team at party conference, and he was already saying to me that he was looking to go back to his old job if it all doesn't work out. And this was, you know, a couple of weeks ago, which means he'd only been in the job. Bear in mind, the Queen died, so that was 10 days of nothing. So he'd really been in the job for like 3 weeks or something.
But in contrast to that, while she hasn't got a really good sort of comms person, she's got sort of too many image makers. Actually, when you meet and know Liz Truss in small groups, she's really got quite a big personality. She understands how ordinary people live. Unusually,
quite flirtatious.
Unusually for a Prime Minister, she's got, you know, experience of an ordinary life, and yet that hasn't come across at all.
All right, OK, well, look, joining me now is Conservative MP Mike Freer, who is Parliamentary Under-Secretary in the Ministry of Justice. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. What do you make of that? Because from where we were sitting, it was all a bit weird. Repeated assertions that there was a very good reason why the Prime Minister couldn't be there. Eventually, Liz Truss walked in looking like a ghost and then left after 29 minutes. Is Liz Truss all right?
Well, I'm not privy to her diary, but my understanding is that she had a meeting that she simply couldn't break. You can never really accuse the Prime Minister throughout her time in Parliament of shirking her responsibilities of coming to the House. And there must have been a very good reason that she wasn't in the House. But equally, on a general point, normally UQs to the Prime Minister are not answered by the Prime Minister. It is not unusual for another minister to answer a UQ. In fact, I think if you look at Michael Ellis, he used to answer all the UQs that were thrown at Boris Johnson. So the procedure is fairly standard, but I'm told that the Prime Minister had a very good reason why she wasn't in the House. And as I say, she takes her duty to the House incredibly seriously, which is borne out by her record in previous roles.
Well, presumably we will find out at some point, because that question is not going to go away, and I'm sure she does have a good reason, but the public do deserve to know exactly what that is. How long do you think it'll be before she resigns?
I don't think the Prime Minister will resign, and neither should she. Certainly, I think that the fundamental Go for Growth agenda is absolutely right. I mean, my previous role was in exports, and I know that the opportunity for UK PLC to continue to thrive and grow is there. So the fundamental direction of travel is absolutely right. And I think what the Prime Minister has very correctly done, and it does take a lot of strength. You know, politicians get criticised. If you don't change your mind, you're accused of being tin-eared and intransigent. And if you do change your mind, you're accused of being weak and wobbly. Well, you can't have it both ways. The Prime Minister has clearly said that the fundamental policy is right, but it may take us longer to get there, and that she got things wrong, and that she's starting to put those right. I think that is a sign of strength. It's a sign of maturity, and we should give her space to get on with the job and get the economy firing on all cylinders.
So is Jeremy Hunt going to be a better Chancellor than Kwasi Kwarteng?
Well, I don't think I can comment on that. I've known Jeremy for some time. I was his whip when he was a Foreign Secretary. He's an incredibly capable man. He's also very popular amongst all sides of the House as someone who's very decent and very diligent. And I think he will be a safe pair of hands. Clearly, he's been able to strike a very good working relationship with the Prime Minister. They agree on very many items, particularly the long-term growth agenda. And I think that the two of them in tandem should be allowed to simply get on with the job and get the economy back on an even keel.
Do you not think it's time that the Prime Minister got rid of whoever it is that's advising her? Because they have basically sold her down the river, haven't they, pretty much? I mean, her speechwriters, as far as I can tell, don't necessarily want to be there. Then you've got people telling her to, you know, do this. The comms has been non-existent. She threw in a political and economic grenade, which, frankly, could have been sold to the nation, but there was no attempt to sell it. There was silence, followed by a Labour Party conference, followed by a Tory Party conference that was quite chaotic. Who's in charge behind the scenes? Because they need to go.
I think the Prime Minister has clearly said that, if you like, the telling of the narrative of what she wanted to achieve could have been done better. She said that herself. In terms of, I mean, I can go back to even David Cameron, who used to talk about sharing the proceeds of growth, and the public accepted that as an economic strategy whilst you held back public spending. And I think the Prime Minister has clearly said that she got that wrong, and she should have explained her strategy more as why growth was the right thing to do and why some of her measures were the right things to stimulate growth that leads to jobs and prosperity. She's accepted that she didn't get the narrative right. I think what we're starting to see now with the reshaping of the economic policy, having Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, I think she's starting to turn that around, and I think we should give her space to do that. As you said earlier, when you know Liz, when you know her as an individual, as you say, she's very engaging. I backed her because I've worked with her on equalities and found her very refreshing to deal with. You knew exactly where you stood. You could have a very good conversation. She listened to the arguments and she made a decision, and was willing to change her mind when she was presented with convincing other information. And I think that is a real sign of strength, and I give her credit
I get
for
that,
adjusting the policy.
But what's tricky is, I think, for the British public, is that clearly she's changed her mind. Hey, personally, I think if you realise that you've made the wrong decision, change your mind, fine, OK, whatever. But they could be portrayed as having a lack of conviction. That's one angle on it. We keep hearing that there's X amount of letters going into Graham Brady, that there's a soft coup going on that might turn into a hard coup the longer that it takes. It's quite hard for the public to believe that Liz Truss will be there for that length of time. And that is a bad thing for the Conservative Party, isn't it?
Well, I've been around long enough that whoever is Prime Minister, there are always some colleagues who are disgruntled. It doesn't really matter who holds the position. There are always people who think either they can do better or they want someone else. And so I put that down as really a bit of the normal froth of Westminster. But frankly, some of my colleagues should calm down, give her the space, give the new Chancellor space, get the economy back on an even keel. The last thing you need is a destabilising leadership election or a destabilising general election. Let's give the Prime Minister time with the Chancellor to get their job underway so we can see the benefits of the decisions that they're taking.
All right, Mike, look, thank you very much for making the time for us. We really do appreciate it. Conservative MP Mike Freer, there's Parliamentary Under-Secretary in the Ministry of Justice. Rather a lot to get stuck into, and who better to do it? Because joining me right now is Cathy Gingo, an editor of The Conservative Woman, and Benjamin Loughnane, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group Conservative think tank. I promised that the next time I had you on this show, I would get your surname right, and I've just butchered it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, doesn't matter. We're not Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, who was up there. No, either of us.
No.
I don't think. Am I? Do I? Can you? I just feel my chair needs to get.
Oh, that's all right. I'll focus on Benjamin Loughnane. Don't worry, that's all right. Benjamin, what did you make of what we just saw in the comments there? There was firstly the urgent question.
Well,
the urgent question, where was Liz? Why wasn't she answering that? I think sending Penny to do it looked weak. She should have taken the opportunity when she's on the back foot to say, no, I'm still here, I'm still the Prime Minister, I'm still in charge. But instead, she refused to go. She sent off someone else to do it for her. And then she turns up halfway through looking like a nodding dog, you know, barely awake.
I thought she was blinking in Morse code at one point.
Indeed, it looked weak. It didn't project strength. I mean, she's just making bad decision after bad decision, one of which was appointing Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, and it's just consistent bad decisions. I think she's done.
Well, there you go. Cathy, go on.
I rather agree with the previous MP speaking. I think she needs to get her mojo back, and she needs to get her mojo back quickly, because she needs to tell this country that we're not to be told by an array of the IMF, the BBC, some snakes in her own party, that when any radical policy is taken in a different direction from the last years of shocking overspending and getting our country into an economic mess that she inherited, that she is not going to be told that is not allowed. And I think this brutality of her treatment indicates that's the message that's coming across. In Britain, you're not allowed to go that way politically. You're not allowed to do anything radical. Well, Liz, I hope you realise that. So you taking a strong, firm stand now, not letting lock down Jeremy Hunt, have the whole say, veering in the direction of Labour. It can't be. So we're finished as a country. And, I mean, the really irritating thing is I listened to Rachel Reeves and I thought I've got sympathy with her, because actually the British public now deserve a general election. You can't have a Conservative Party in government doing handbrake U-turns. And creating the party who created the financial crisis.
Lots to get stuck into there, Benjamin. I mean, the country's been... No, I mean, this is great. I can tell you've been sat in the green room for a while, just getting more and more worked up, right? And then you've come out and unleashed here. But I thought it was... I didn't want to interrupt you. You were in full flow. Benjamin, do we need a general election? Sharpish.
I think if we have a general election, we'll end up with Labour. That'll be worse, I think. But inevitably, when we have a general election, it's going to happen. If Liz Truss is still in office, I think we're going to lose it. I don't see her turning it around. I admire what you're saying, Cathy, about the fact that she needs to say no to these sort of global institutions, these big institutions which say this is the policy and you can't decide on your own as an individual country what your policy is. But I just don't see Liz as having the guts or the gumption to be able to... The first sign, within the first week of being in PAB, within the first budget, she's U-turned immediately.
I wonder if it's guts. I get that about the U-turns, but I think just a general... She's not got the kind of sass and pizzazz that...
Charisma.
Charisma, right? And she's not got that, really. Now, fair enough, that's not necessarily... Maybe Boris Johnson had a bit too much of that, OK? Maybe there's a happy medium to be had there, but... You know, there is a sales pitch element involved in your policies now, and she's not got that, and I just don't know whether or not she realises that she needs to actually sell stuff to people.
It's interesting. I think you're absolutely right, but I think to say, oh, it's just a comms problem, it's far more than a comms problem. It's a problem with this country of shifting the entire narrative of political debate. If you watch that debate, and one reason I began to get a bit charged up, like you do when you're on Twitter, is that it was the limited parameters of this debate taking place, that Jeremy Hunt was allowed to sit there because we don't have a proper opposition and talk about this 2 billion saved here and 45 billion that we couldn't afford in a growth tax cuts policy, when he was behind, and Rachel Reeves and the outside, behind the policies that have put this government, our country, into such an economic crisis. Nobody raised net zero either. How does Jeremy Hunt think he's going to do the 2 trillion net zero is going to cost us? I mean, this is a sort of mad debate. It's an Alice in Wonderland debate going on in the House of Commons.
And we had £500 billion on lockdown, which no one opposed, but 45 billion on tax cuts, oh no, that's too much. We can lock the whole country up, that's not too radical. But a budget where you cut people's taxes, that is enough to
net zero as well, which, I mean, as it stands, we're basically... I mean, that's on the never, isn't it?
It's like radical for us, but not for you. Left-wing radicalism, that's fine. But if you do anything slightly right of, you know, Trotsky, you're suddenly a radical.
And Liz Truss needs to stand up and slap down Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt very quickly. She has to do that if she's going to survive as any credibility with Prime Minister. He cannot say that lockdown was compassionate. Furlough was not compassionate in the end. It's created a real problem with the work-shy population.
More people are now seriously unwell and indeed dying as a result of our lockdown measures than they would have done.
Well, how compassionate is that, Mr. Hunt? Really, really get real. How compassionate is it to say to all those care workers, oh, I'm not going to put my mother into a care home if the care workers are not vaxxed? Look at the booster now, Mr. Hunt.
I'm deeply sceptical of anyone that thinks that any kind of vaccination should be mandatory or even really seriously considers it. And he's been on record saying he considered a mandatory flu
jab. He was
jab.
also celebrating the fact that his sister in China was getting welded into her flat but he was saying that was a good policy. This is not the sort of person you want to trust with power.
This is somebody who doesn't understand free enterprise or a free economy or freedom of speech,
But
unfortunately.
Liz Truss has got to start selling herself and selling her policies and selling everything to the nation. Because she could create...
But this is Liz Truss we're talking about. She doesn't have the character. She's not Boris Johnson. She's not a salesman. She doesn't have the charisma. You can't change a personality on a dime.
Look, I'm going to get your reaction to some of these clips because this afternoon I went out and about and asked the great British public what they made of all of this political turmoil. This is what they said to me.
It's kind of pointless. I just don't feel like there's any answers anymore and we're not getting in the right direction that we need.
So you don't think there's anyone really from any party that gets you going?
No, not really. And for me, I don't believe that groups are like Conservative, Labour, as they were years ago, or what people believe those parties are. So personally, as a young voter, I don't really know what to vote for anymore.
I just don't trust them. They say one thing and something else happens.
Is that the same for either party? Have you lost faith in politics, basically?
A little bit, yes.
It's a tragedy for UK, but not just for UK, for everybody.
Why?
You have a prime minister who doesn't really know what she's doing.
I feel like there's been so many people in charge that it's like,
It doesn't really matter who's in charge anymore.
No, definitely not.
I think they're all the same.
They're all kind of the same. It just depends who's at the front.
Has any of the chaos that's happened in the last few weeks actually affected your life?
Well, the cost of living crisis. Yeah, definitely. It also is really hard, especially watching it all on the news. It's kind of hard to watch it change from what it used to be when I was younger to now being like, no one likes you.
Well, I have been riveted this morning on television. And it is pathetic. We look, we're like a third world country. She should go.
She should go?
Definitely, no. I didn't ever think she should be there anyway.
OK, time just very quickly for a little bit of reaction. Cathy Gingell there. Now, you were itching to say something else, so I'm just going to leave the floor to you.
So my final thing is that the disdain that the Conservative Parliamentary Party has shown for the grassroots is absolutely astonishing. And they now risk losing their entire grassroots membership to Richard Tyson, Reform UK, if he gets his act together.
Benjamin, this is a big point, isn't it? The Conservatives now might actually have nobody because they've essentially lost the grassroots. They've lost the Parliamentary Party. I mean, it's bleak.
It's dire to go from an 8-seat majority in a couple of years to the situation they're in at the moment. It's awful, but there's never been a better time for a third party to come onto the scene.
Exactly.
I think Nigel must be absolutely itching to get
Where
back
is
into the
Nigel?
action.
Where is Nigel Farage?
Now, it's never been better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure Nigel will be on this particular TV channel a bit later on. But it is getting harder and harder to ignore the fact that there is fertile ground for any political party, isn't there? Anyway, up next is Tubes & Co. Thank you, both of you, by the way. Up next is Tubes & Co. with Michelle Dewberry, who is here just on the other side of the studio. Michelle, what have we got coming up?
Hello, Patrick. Yes, it was only about 40-odd days ago now, Liz Truss, she became the Prime Minister on a ticket of cutting our taxes. As we've all seen today, that ticket has been firmly ripped up and pretty much chucked in the bin. What next then, Patrick? That is the question that I'm asking. Some people saying she's got no mandate to lead even, never mind leave, that's what people want her to do. Some are saying there's a coup unfolding under our very eyes, Patrick, is there?
Yeah.
I also want to talk about today's You Don't Say news. Border Force officials are basically saying that national security could be coming under threat by the rise in people crossing the channel with suspected links to criminality. As I said, you don't say. What's the answer there? And lastly, privileged men, a new support group for them. I've got to be honest, you wouldn't want to be a white privileged privileged man in this day and age, would you?
Oh, it's about time someone stood up for the white middle-class man in this country now. But I do get what you mean, exactly. Michelle, look, thank you very much, Michelle Dewberry. We'll be with you with Jubes and Co, and it'll be fantastic as well because you'll be able to talk about some other things, not just what's going on in the House of Commons. But yes, I will be back tomorrow, 3 p.m. Before that, it's your weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Tomorrow could start a little murky, a few fog patches around. We're getting to that time of year where they're a bit slow to clear. But for many, it'll be a dry and a bright day with sunny spells. It's been a bit of a mixed picture today with low pressure dominating across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Quite blustery conditions still across parts of southern Scotland, northern England especially. Those winds slowly easing overnight. The showers tending to fade from much of Scotland as well, although we'll keep some going across the far north. For many then, it's going to be a dry night with clear spells. And as the winds ease off, that is a recipe for things to turn. Firstly, a bit chilly, well down into single figures with some pockets of frost likely, especially across Northern Ireland. But also some patches of fog through Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, northern and central parts of England in particular. And it could take a while for that fog to clear. Certainly every chance of some fog patches through the morning rush hour. Once that fog's gone, though, most places set fair, dry and bright. Small chance of 1 or 2 showers in the southwest and in the far north, where it'll still be pretty cool, but elsewhere temperatures generally getting above average, mid to even high teens across parts of the south. The winds will pick up through the day in the southwest. A few more showers coming in here during Tuesday night, and if anything, that rain could pep up, spread into parts of Wales as we head into Wednesday morning. Then this line of showery rain set to track northwards during Wednesday. Some heavy bursts mixed in with that as it perhaps gets into the Midlands, parts of Northern Ireland, and late in the day into parts of northern England too. Further south, fairly cloudy scene with a few scattered showers. Generally dry and bright there for Scotland and the far north of England, with a bit of an easterly breeze picking up. Some of those North Sea coasts will be rather fresh, but again in the south temperatures could get to 16, 17 or 18 Celsius with the help of a bit of sunshine. Low pressure continues to dominate out to the west, so bands of rain moving northwards, but it's going to stay mild this week.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Jubes & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, can you believe it was only about 40-odd days ago Liz Truss was elected as our Prime Minister? The ticket she was in on was all about, wasn't it? Lowering taxes, growth, growth, growth. Well, some would say that that ticket has been picked up, ripped up and pretty much thrown in the bin by the second Chancellor of that premiership. Where do we stand then? Some people are saying that Liz Truss basically is a Prime Minister.
Our apologies, Michelle was interrupted there, but Jubes & Co will be back in just a moment. I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB Newsroom with the latest news headlines. And as you've been seeing on GB News throughout the afternoon, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has warned MPs that there will be decisions of eye-watering difficulty coming up in the next few weeks, as he today detailed how he dropped the majority of pledges made by Kwasi Kwarteng in the mini-budget. In an emergency statement,